conclusions. And at the very end, I get 2 minutes to point out the errors in the staff report, and you realize that you've just wasted a half hour to an hour of your time coming to incorrect conclusions based upon alternative facts. So when you get to agenda item 5, my colleague is handing out a copy of an annotated copy of the staff report where it says that there's no American precedent for moving to limited voting, no court cases that declare it constitutional. Those are both incorrect statements. In the packet that you're receiving, on page 4 is an excerpt of Lofrisco versus Schaefer, where they conclude that limited voting is indeed constitutional, and they cite other cases that also state that it's constitutional. In terms of jurisdictions moving to limited voting, page 5 is an article from the Cleveland Plain Dealer about a settlement of a Federal Voting Rights Act case brought by the Justice Department against the Euclid, Ohio School Board, where they agreed to a settlement using limited voting. Page 6 is an excerpt from the Department of Justice website describing United States versus Town of Lake Park, Florida, where again they settled the case using limited voting, and on pages 7 through 14, you'll actually find the consent decree. And I've got arrows pointing to where they mention the use of limited voting. Pages 15 through 20 of the handout that's going around is a list of 164 jurisdictions that use limited voting. If a court had declared it unconstitutional, none of those jurisdictions would be able to use it. Finally, when we do get to agenda item 5, I would like to introduce a proposal which I think was emailed to you all prior to this meeting, and that's also included on pages 21 and 22 of the report. Page 3 of that handout summarizes what I just said. So when you get to item 5, please remember that staff's report concerning limited voting is totally incorrect, and their recommendation about limited voting should be ignored. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anyone else from the public that would like to speak? Yes. Okay.
My name is Dave Kadlachek. I just wanted to speak briefly, more or less repeating what I had said last time, since there was something in the minutes that I didn't think reflected it, and rather than go and saying, should have said this, should have said that in the minutes, I'll say it again now. There's plenty of competent, intelligent, articulate, honest people on the city council and who ran for city council and weren't elected. The point of electing a city council is to get competent, able, honest, articulate people who represent the various interests within the city onto the council, where they can discuss the issues from different points of view, and that the dialogue about those can take place in public view among spokespeople of the various interests, rather than through campaign mailers only once every 2 years. The point is not to pick the most able, most articulate, etc. The council members aren't best. Aren't or shouldn't be best in that sense. They should just be good enough, and good enough representatives of different interests and communities. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? Okay. Let's approve the minutes from the June 12th, 2017 meeting.
Motion to approve the minutes.
All in favor? Any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. Okay, let's move to the city attorney direction on by-district election options. And actually, before we start, what I really want to do today is I think we need to figure out the districting piece. I think we need to figure out what that, okay.
Sorry, you didn't hear me, but I didn't vote. I abstained for the minutes last meeting.
Okay.
I wasn't here.
Okay, so one abstention for Marcus, thank you. I think we need to move forward with the districting piece at a minimum. I'd like to see us make a decision today on the districting. In order for us to give a recommendation to council, we're gonna have to move this forward, and it's almost paralysis by analysis, and I think we need to start putting the pen to paper and moving it forward. Not saying that our discussions haven't been great, because they've been very, very good discussions, and there's been a ton of participation. But my goal is to, at least at a minimum, get the districting piece done today. So the next meeting or two, we can focus on the voting method. If we get the districting done quickly, then we can move on to the voting method by the way the agenda is written, okay? So I'll pass it over to the city attorney.
Okay, well, I sent a memo because I think it's important that we start focusing on actually making a decision here. And my memo basically says that it's part of the packet. Yeah.
Last two pages.
It's a very short memo. It basically requests you to actually make decisions. So the summary of my advice is as follows. The committee has conducted 4 sessions, and you've received extensive amounts of information. And the registrar of voters came here the last time and said, given the timeline, there are only 4 realistic alternatives to consider. And those would be either keeping with some kind of at-large system, go to districts, you could do cumulative, and you could do limited. At least the voting system would handle limited. I've also several times advised you that the only way that we could, I know there was a request by one of the committee members to answer a bunch of questions about how we could stop a lawsuit. We can't stop lawsuits. Only judges can stop lawsuits. I can't stop a lawsuit. The city can't stop one by itself. The plaintiff in the case that has been filed against us has indicated that the lawsuit will continue if we don't go to districts. So that's the only advice I can really give you about anything to do with the lawsuit, is that simply if you decide not to go to districts, the lawsuit will continue. And that's really all I can say about that from a legal standpoint. I've got some recent testimony from the public that now there is information about limited voting having been used in the United States. There was previous testimony that there was never limited voting allowed in the United States. So I was basing my memo on what the testimony was before us at the committee. I briefly looked through the authority cited in the report, and it doesn't look like any of those are reported appellate decisions, so I was not aware of them. There may be, in fact, cases that historically have allowed it as a remedy in a federal Voting Rights Act case. I don't think any of based upon my cursory involvement with this, I don't know whether they've ever been tested against the one person, one vote rule in an appellate court. Having looked at this and run it by an attorney who's an expert in voting rights, he did not mention to me that there were limited voting decisions in the United States. From a personal standpoint, as a lawyer who kind of basically operates on common sense, I think the idea of a charter provision that would say to people, even though you have three possible candidates and 3 seats open or 2 seats open and 2 candidates, you only get to vote for one person. My best legal advice to you would be, based on my experience with municipalities, I just don't think a charter amendment like that would be very well received by the voters in Santa Clara. It doesn't strike me as something that is particularly fair. In the cases it has seemed to have been used based upon this recent information. We're nowhere near like the situations in the cases in which the courts seem to have allowed it. Now, I don't really have much advice to give you on cumulative voting. Some of you seem to like it, some of you don't. And it does seem like a system that could be used if the registrar of voters had to use it. He explained the difficulties with it. He explained the level. You'd have to educate the public if you had cumulative voting, and there wouldn't be much time to do it. So, I think that the committee should really consider that in determining if they would like to go to cumulative voting. I think you should consider, when you would like to go to cumulative voting. Does it make sense to do it in 2018, or does it make sense to do it at some later date, or do you want more time to think about it, and perhaps after we find out whether we went to a new way of voting, we want to go to cumulative voting, or some other type of voting. The one thing I would suggest to you not to do is to go to cumulative voting in 2018 and then change it to some other type of voting in 2020. I don't think that would be a very good idea at all. And then finally, I think it's time to, I really would recommend that you just start proceeding kind of methodically at this point. First, maybe bring up the idea of, do we go to districts or not? Just answer that one question and see how everyone feels. Maybe take a vote. Maybe, I would hope that you could come to a decision about at least that one question. Do we go to districts or not? Is there an overriding decision not to go to districts? And then after you answer that question, then say, okay, if we do go to districts, how many districts should we have? And what recommendations should we make about how many districts to have, and maybe how council might go about putting that on the ballot. Other than that, I don't really have too much. I don't have a strong opinion about cumulative voting or ranked choice voting. I think you've heard merits to both of them. But I would caution you not to make things too complicated, because if you make things too complicated, you run the danger of the voters not voting for it. And you can always do 2 ballot measures. You can always recommend 2 ballot measures. One ballot measure to go to districts, another ballot measure for something else. And if people like one, they can vote for one. If they like the other, they can vote for the other. And you can see what the people of Santa Clara really want to do. So those are my remarks. If you have questions, I'd be happy to answer them. I'm just trying to move this along. I really see this process as having really exhausted most of the real discussion items, and it's time that we just kind of got back to focusing on actually making a recommendation to council. Sure.
So making an assumption that we do decide to go to districts, that's all we do, and then the actual districting is done independently, is that correct?
It would not be done by this group, no.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you're referring to drawing the lines of the district, yeah. I mean, you can make recommendations about, like, depending on how many districts you might recommend, you'll have to recognize in the next election that there'll be some district that won't get to vote for a council member. Right. Okay.
If we recommend a number of districts, will a demographer have time before the next election to determine where those lines are drawn?
I think what we would do is if you made the recommendation, we would probably start work on getting ready to do the districts even before the election was finished, so that we had a head start on getting the districts drawn in time for November. And of course, people would have to be able to know when they would have to sign up for those districts.
The other question, though, is for the candidates that are running, right? They have to determine if they're going to run based on who's running, based on who the incumbents are. There's a lot of variables that go into running. You don't start a campaign. People think you start a campaign in July. You start a campaign in January you start figuring out what you're going to do and what your strategy is and so on and so forth. And so my concern with, trying to do districts by 2018 is that the candidates aren't even really going to have time to figure out what their strategy is, or do we even know that it can be done in enough time if we have the demographer? I mean, there's always politics and everything else in how it all works. So I'm just throwing it out there, and I'd like to use that as a segue to start talking about districting. So I'd like to ask the group to start on the topic of districting. So Keith, go ahead, and then Hassam.
Thank you. I handed out a set of my thoughts.
And I'd say if you look at my second and third page, I think they're kind of in the vein of what you were just discussing, which is I have talked to some people that run for office before. I've looked at the city clerk site that talks about the election process, and I have concerns that even if we put this measure on the ballot in June, and if it passes overwhelmingly such that 3 days after the election finishes, we are certain we can go forward, I don't know that there is enough time by November for the city and for candidates to adapt to run in districts. In particular, candidates are allowed to open, I mean, you file a Form 501 in May, and you're supposed to say what you're running for. In May, you're running for seat 3 or seat 4 or seat 6, and on June 9th, you're running for a seat in the north part of the city or a seat in the west part of the city. What are the implications of having to change your campaign midway through? You're not allowed to spend money before you filed a Form 501. You can't spend a dime. You can't buy a website. You can't ask people for money. I mean, changing from districts 4 months out from an election, really, when we expect elections to be 8 months, is, to me, a really hard thing to propose. And I have some other questions in there if you read them, but that's one of my concerns. So I mean, I would like to ask, we have said we would like this for fall of 2018. It seems rushed to me. If this is on the ballot fall of 2018 to take effect fall of 2020, the city and the population has 2 years to understand how it's going to work, to prepare for things, to make new voting materials. The Registrar of Voters in 2020 has an updated election system that can handle all of these methods of election. So we don't need to have one method of electing for districts in 2018 and possibly a different method in 2020. If we pick cumulative, we don't have to go with the crazy, you list people 4 times.
So let's just stick with the districting for right now. Let's not.
Well, I
get
mean,
into
with districts, right? You could do cumulative voting with districts, but you don't have the weirdness that you have to explain it 2 different times. So that's my thoughts on what you were talking about. With respect to districts as a whole, I mean, I think early on, I'm not a huge fan of districts, but I am not against 2 districts or 3 districts. I personally prefer 2 districts because I think the more districts you have, the more, not quite partisan, but the more split up the ability of the right decision makers to happen is. So those are my thoughts. If you read what I gave out, there's more information there.
Thank you. Assam?
Oh, I just wanted a clarification because we skipped the demographic report on agenda item 4. Was that what we were going to do? You were gonna skip it?
That was just more for information. If somebody wants to talk about it or make that a part of the discussion, that's fine. But it was done, I think, back in not the previous, but the one before that. And so the reason I wanted it to go out was so you could use that as you're formulating your decision. But
that was my question.
But you're more than welcome. Anybody's more than welcome to reference it because that's what it's for. Yeah, Rex.
Speaking to Keith, worrying about time, I've been on 2 different redistricting committees with a consultant, and they can come up with 4 or 5 plans within less than a month and probably a couple of weeks, and they're good plans. So once it's decided you're going to go with, I don't like 2 districts. 3, I don't know enough about the dynamics to say whether I like or not. I prefer the 6 district with the mayor being elected by or at large. But if the city, I don't know how the city intends to organize the districts that have decided what they're going to do. Are they going to hire a consultant, or are they going to do it internally, or are they going to pick a committee and say, okay, draw some lines? So basically there are people, I mean, the demographic people that we have reports from, those two ladies are very, very good. And they probably could tell you tomorrow where the best lines would be. And it'd be within 10, all of them would be within 10% of the population. So what Keith is maybe worried about, I mean, there are other things he was talking about that maybe create some worry, but that part of it, I don't think should be a big concern if you approach it the right way.
Well, I'd say to answer that, I also have no concerns that if we decided on, if the city council decided on the number of districts, that well before next June, a demographer and a committee of people could put together a very reasonable set of lines for districts. My concerns are all the other things around campaigns, of the candidates that are actually running. I mean, if you pick 6 districts, and in May, people decide, I would like to run for city council, and they have to wait for June to see if the measure passes, and they have to wait for after June to see the actual lines being officially decided, they may discover in mid-July that they no longer live in a district that is having an election that fall. And so they have wasted 4 months. Or they may end up in a district running against their very good friend who is also going to run for city council. And now, I mean, that's my concern about timing. I'm not concerned about drawing the lines for the districts themselves.
I suspect at some point, probably before June of next year, the court is going to play into this whole thing if the steps aren't taken to show that the city is going to do something that they're being told to do by the law.
But we can't really, we don't know that.
No, we're strictly recommendation, but
No, I'd just like to make a few observations. One is that there may be ways of drawing the districts even before the ballot measure is passed, so that people would know what district they were living in and could run for even before the ballot measure might pass. So if they wanted to start raising money, I suppose they could. On the other hand, in a lot of other places in the world, campaigns are much shorter and much less painful than the ones we have. and it may not be such a bad idea for us to try that out for one election cycle. But that's just something to consider. You could not pull your papers until after we know the results of the June campaign. So that's another thing to consider. And finally, I forgot my last. In terms of drawing the districts, there's a lot going on. The Supreme Court recently held that gerrymandering by what happened in North Carolina was the court said to the state of North Carolina, you've drawn districts such that black folks have been excluded. Then they drew these incredible districts trying to really deal with the demographics of making sure that black folks got elected, and then the Supreme Court just ruled that, hey, wait a minute, those black folks didn't get to vote in that white district next to you because you put them all in one black district. So I think that our advice would be when you start drawing, since Santa Clara really doesn't have concentrations of any one ethnic group in any one neighborhood, I think our advice would probably be just draw the districts based purely on population balance and let the chips fall where they may. So I don't think we'd have to spend a whole heck of a lot of time on looking at demographics. I mean, we would consider it, we would look at it to some extent, and there are some things said about how you draw districts in the Voting Rights Act, in state law. So we would follow that. We'd look at balancing the number of voters in each district, the number of residents in each district, and we just make sure that they were well balanced from a population standpoint. But I don't think we'd make extra special efforts to try to include, one ethnic group over another. I mean, that's the other consideration for Santa Clara is our ethnic groups are so diverse that if you try to include one ethnic group, for example, Asians, in one district, you may artificially exclude Latinos in that. I mean, I don't know. It's just, if you start trying to be too clever about these things, you could get in trouble the other way. So I think just, let's keep it simple.
Yep, we got Mary.
Thanks. Just on the point on timing, I think Keith's points are well taken and Tino's as well, but I think that would be true. Every candidate in the race would be in the same place. And so I don't know that there would be as much of a concern about sort of fairness as it seems like you all might assume, because I think Brian's right. It would just functionally, it would end up shortening our election season for that particular council cycle. Because if we make a strong recommendation to council and council agrees and starts to work on it, then the whole city knows and will need to be paying attention to the fact that our elections may be changing. And so I would think that savvy members of the public who want to run for city council, which is to say all the people who want to run for city council typically are pretty savvy, will be paying attention to that fact and making decisions about whether they want to take the risk of potentially pulling papers early or if they would rather just wait until it's decided. So I don't think we should, I personally don't feel like the timing considerations are quite as strong, even though they're well taken.
Thank you. Rod?
Yeah, let me also point out a few things with regards to the nuances of doing the paperwork process to run for office. The initial paperwork, the 501, 410 forms and things like that that are filed with the Secretary of State, if somebody were to even decide that they wanted to seek city council prior to the determination of if there will be districts or not, can be amended. So it wouldn't be as if somebody said, I'm running for seat 4, which is open, they would not be able to then amend that to say, no, I'm running for this council district. Or if they were out of a district, simply shut their campaign down. Additionally, it's important to note that the process of formally pulling nomination papers, which is a different process for somebody who hasn't run for office. You've got the process of starting a campaign committee with the FPPC that allows you, the Secretary of State and the FPPC, which allows you to put money into a campaign, and that's more of a transparency process to show from where you're fundraising and how that money is being spent. Then you have a separate process, which is the nomination process. That's what people normally think of when you say, have you pulled your papers yet? And that's the process of putting your name actually on the ballot, making sure that you've got the valid number of signatures, your candidate statement of qualifications and things like that. That doesn't happen until mid-July to early August is that window there. So in fact, before you could even pull nomination papers, if districts were in place, if you have an election in the first Tuesday of June, you would have some clarity well ahead of that process if you were to choose to do so.
Okay, thank you. Hassam?
If people don't mind, I want to go back to the districting discussion, if that's okay, not in the timing discussion. Is that okay? So I passed out a paper, and to be honest, I had prepared this before last meeting, so it doesn't have limited voting on here, but I do want to just maybe give a commentary or kind of my opinion that I would agree with our city attorney's comments that limited voting would maybe not make people feel that they're getting their voice out there because they only get to vote once when there's 2 seats open in 2018. And I just put these together. This is just for completeness sake. It doesn't mean that I prefer any of these over the other, but it just shows you a visual, what it looks like on the first page. If the city was just at large, which is kind of what we are right now, and then the second page is 2 districts. 3 council members each, and then the third page is 3 districts with 2 council members each, and then the last one is 6 districts with 1 council member each. And don't bother too much with where the dotted lines are drawn. It's just for visual representation. And then on the right-hand side, to the right of the map, you'll see different systems. obviously by seat is what we have right now. At large would just be, it's called first past the post. So it's basically whoever, or sorry, not first past, it's whoever gets the most votes. So even if you have 10 candidates and the highest vote getter gets 12%, they win. And then there's cumulative, which we learned about, and then there's instant runoff and single transferable vote, which from a voter standpoint is very similar in how they fill out the ballot, but the calculations are slightly different.
I want to stick not to the voting.
I know. I'm just explaining what's on the paper. So my preference is I read Keith's note, and I mentioned this a couple meetings ago. With regards to districts, I very much favor the district scenarios that allow for more members within that district. And that allows for, when we discuss the different kinds of voting systems, the opportunity for us to have a more proportional representation system within the city. So ideally, my preference would be for 2-district city with 3 council members each, with the caveat that in any given election, all 3 council members are running at the same time for that district. In other words, you have multiple people running you have multiple seats open in that election for that very district. So my preference would be for 2 districts with 3 council members each, where all three spots are being voted on at the same time. That is my preference. Correct. Rather than if you were to, the downside with the 3 districts and 2 members each, again, with the premise that I said, where you're voting for multiple openings within that district, is that you would have, on one year, you'd have only 2 seats that you're voting for, and on the next year, you'd have 4 seats that you're voting. Now, the voter would only vote for the 2 in their district at any given point in time, but you're alternating the council balance by 4 and 2 and 4 and 2, which is kind of how we have it now, and I think it's broken. I think that system is broken because in 2018 we're only voting for 2 council members. We just voted for 4, right? So I think that's broken, and I think it's just a much better balance where you vote 3 and 3 and 3 and 3, but you only get to vote every 4 years depending on which district you're in.
Okay, thank you. So what do other people think? Go ahead, Bev.
So if we're just going to try and, well, there's a bunch of different purposes we're trying to do, but let's talk districting. I like what you said. I'm all for a multi-seat 2 districts also, where you have 3 and 3. And I would almost like to see something around the lines of a from district election where the candidates can run to represent their districts, but then it's open for the rest of the city for voting. At large. Yep. Because it keeps it simple, and that's what people are used to. And if we're trying to get something on the ballot that the populace would vote in, I think that would be the easiest.
Keith, actually, let's go to Marcus, and then we'll go to Keith.
So my opinion on the at-large voting on districts is, I believe if we vote on something and that becomes our new system, I don't believe we changed anything. I mean, it'd pretty much be the same, wouldn't it? We'd be able to say that we have districts. If I'm understanding that completely.
I think you have different representation. So you have people who are running in the districts, and that causes different candidate pools instead of just everybody can run and everybody can vote. That's how I looked at it.
Okay.
I guess I was saying, I don't think I understood what you were saying with respect to from district, but the whole city.
It's basically the way the school district, you'd have 3 candidates during a gubernatorial, but the whole city could vote for those 3 candidates.
Okay, so if we have 2 districts, call them A and B.
You'd have an election every 2 years.
The A district is up for election. In order to run as a candidate, you must live in the A district, but the entire city votes for people that run from the A district. And then 2 years later, the entire city votes for people that live from the B district. And I'm not a lawyer, I just don't know if that would qualify as a district.
It would
I mean, it
not.
just-
It would be still an at-large election. It would not qualify as a district election for the California Voting Rights Act.
Okay. Okay. Go ahead, Mary.
I think that I personally would prefer that there's an opportunity for every member of the electorate to elect a council member in every election, which is why I'd previously been an advocate of 3 districts with 2 members that are alternating. I do think, I see some of the benefits of having multi-member districts that are elected at the same time, but I think in terms of people's being able to participate in the system, to feel that they are represented, being able to vote every 2 years for a member of council in your 2-member district, in one of your 3 districts, so everybody has one running every year, is something that I prefer from my own standpoint of feeling more represented. But I also like the fact that that then means that if you're interested in being on council, you have the opportunity to run every 2 years because your district is always up for election.
Okay. Teresa and then Marcus.
Yeah, and I'd like to also support the idea of 3 districts with 2 seats in them, because I think it makes running for election a lot more affordable for candidates. It also allows candidates to be more connected in their communities when the communities are smaller. And I think that's really what makes a vibrant city, when people feel that they're invested, and it's easier to be invested when you go to the local store, coffee shop, and you meet people that you're electing. So if we're going to go with districting, I think that making the districts work for the people that are voting in terms of the affordability and connecting with your community. So that would be my 2 cents on that one.
Thank you, Marcus.
Yeah, I really like the 3 district, 2-member idea. I think that having 2 members per district, if I understand that, that means every 2 years, 1 person from each district will be running, right?
Well, it goes back to what Hussam said. There's going to be a 2-year period where 4 members are running, and then, or you could do 1 every 2 years from the district. You can do it either way.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I just want to say that I do support the 3 district 2-member.
Okay. Saskia, and then Steve.
Okay, the only thing I want to remind people is we want to avoid that mini mayor, right?
The what?
The mini mayor system.
Mini mayor, okay.
Yeah, because I hear a little bit of that in some of this too, that there could be a mini mayor system, and I don't want to see that. That would be pointless.
Thank you. Steve?
I also support the 3 district. My concern is with just 2 districts, if there's a geographic issue like Bay Rec on the south side or a stadium on the north side issue, and it's not their turn to vote, they don't get to weigh in on something that directly affects their lives. So I like the 3 district. And if you go to mini mayor, or if you go to districting, I think we're going to battle that mini mayor issue. I think it comes with districting.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. It's a concern.
Hazel?
I was just going to share my opinion also. So I think also that the 3 district, 2 multi-member or 2-member city council members would also be a good fit. One, because it satisfies the requirement for the lawsuit, and then also because of its representation for the different areas in our cities with their unique issues, right? And I would even go further to make a suggestion that how we draw the lines, just a quick one, that we do it by zip code, 95050, 95054, and 95051. Sooner rather than later. I know that there's an imbalance in population right now, especially on the north side, but there's also a number of projects there that are high density, and I think that having someone in the council sooner rather than later will give people the opportunity to give their input on the developments moving forward as well.
Okay. Jody?
I also like the 3 districts with 2 council members. I really like the idea that every 2 years you can weigh in, because things happen in the city all the time, and I wouldn't want to wait 4 years for making a change in my district. I'm also wondering, Brian, if you can clarify, if we set up districts in the next year, then once the 2020 census comes out, would they do those districts again?
Well, the one thing I do know about one person, one vote is that the districts would have to be balanced from a population standpoint. You couldn't have one district having too much more of a population than the other. So you basically, that's the one demographic you really do have to follow under the Constitution. And the redistricting would take place after the 2020 census. But typically those kind of redistricting, you're only moving the line a little bit one way or the other. And in a city like this, I wouldn't imagine that it would change very much, but it would capture new developments that had occurred within the 10-year period between the census. So in other words, if you had an influx of voters into one district and that made it necessary, then it would have to become geographically smaller because it had more people in it, and then the other districts would change the lines. But typically the lines don't change all that much.
And would this first go at it be based on the 2010 census?
It would have to be, yeah.
Because that's the information they have.
That's the information we have, yeah.
Okay. Okay. I think that I still like the idea of 3 districts with two per.
Hassan?
One of the things that I prefer with the 2 districts over the three districts is, well, there's a couple things, but one of the things that we haven't really talked about is the size of each district from a population standpoint. I mean, we're a city of 120,000 people, roughly, give or take. And so when you talk about splitting it 3 ways, you're talking about 40,000 roughly per district. I know, but you draw the districts based on population, not based on voters. You draw a district based on population. So when they do the balancing of the lines, it's based on population, not on eligible voters within that district. Brian, can you confirm that? When lines are drawn, it is based on population of just population, not the number of eligible voters.
It's based on population.
Yeah. So when you cut the city 3 ways, you're talking about roughly 40,000 represented per district. And if you compare that to any of the cities neighboring us, it is very small. So there's a plus side to that as well, which is, you get to know your constituency better. But the downside is that you've now cut up the city into smaller chunks, kind of along the mini mayor criteria. When you have 2 districts with 3 council members each, it's very difficult for you to identify a mini mayor when there are 2 other council members in that same district. So I'm still in favor of the 2 districts. I do see the point that is being made about wanting to participate in the election process, in the voting process every 2 years. But the flip side of that coin is that when you have 3 council members that you're voting for all at once in your district, in the 2 district scenario, you get to have a much bigger impact in one go, in one shot, where you can really, pick, the person that represents your voice better. And if you are a minority voice, if you're just voting for one person every 2 years, you're never going to get your voice in there because you will never have more than 50% if you are a minority voice. So so when you go to 3 districts with 2 members each, and you're only voting for one person every 2 years, that one person will always be a majority representative because they will always get the majority of the vote. Once you open up to multi-member districts where you're voting for multiple members at a time, you are now allowing people to get their minority voice in. And that's really why, even if we go to 3 districts, I would still strongly advocate for voting for both members at the same time, rather than alternating one and one and one and one. You guys kind of see where I'm going with this? Because when you're only voting for one person, it's the majority voice is going to win that one person every single time. But when you're voting for multiple people, regardless of how the system you set up, then the second place winner gets a seat. And if you go with 2 districts, the third place winner also gets a seat. So you're going to get that minority voice in there. And that's kind of my 2 cents.
Thank you. Somebody had their hand up, and I don't remember where. Well, see, I just had that ESP. I knew you were going to do it.
I think, Hossam, your point is well taken, that I think, obviously, if you're just electing one person at a time, the runners-up never get in. That's true. I do think that by going to 3 districts, the possibility for political constituencies that are minority voices in the city to be able to elect the candidates of their choosing, I think is actually fairly high, because it is only 40,000 people. Some much smaller number probably are eligible registered voters. And so the ability for someone who is active in their community, who has support of a constituency that's maybe not a majority of the city, but is a majority of their community, or is potentially active, can walk all the precincts, can go to the community members in their community. It's cheaper, to Teresa's point, and I think it's more possible for someone who maybe starts out as not the front runner to overcome that disadvantage in a small district. And when you have to convince, I don't know, let's give or take like 30,000 people at the most, but probably more like 10,000 people.
So when you're talking about, again, splitting the city is about what, 15 square miles, give or take? You're talking about splitting the city 3 ways, that's 5 square miles, roughly, okay? The comparison that you're making about, it's 5 square miles versus 7.5 square miles. Yes, it's 50% more, but it's still 7.5 square miles. So, we're still a small city, not just population-wise, but the size-wise as well. So I would hate to advocate for a scenario or a system that says those 2 council members just represent me. No, all of them up there represent me. They all need to represent me. They all need to represent my issues. I don't care if I don't live on the north side. I live in the old quad. But I care. You guys, when you watch me coming in here in the council, probably 80% of the time I go and speak up there, it's because of an issue on the north side. But that's just because it's a small city. I care about everything that happens everywhere, and I want my council members to care about what's happening in my neighborhood as well, and not just what's happening in their districts. So we're not a huge city, like population or size-wise. For us to be splitting the city multiple ways, and then talking, the rhetoric, not rhetoric, but the notion that only the people from my district represent me. No, I don't agree with that. Everybody up there represents every one of us in the city. And the more that we can empower those minority voices by letting the second place, winner, vote getter, and the third place vote getter getting a seat at the table, that's when we start, even if the voice is something that I don't agree with, but I want to hear that voice up there because they represent everybody in the city, not just the majority vote.
Rex?
Basically, listening to Hassan, and he's pushing the system that's kind of idealistic, but what Santa Clara is facing is kind of a practical issue. There's some 20 cities have gone through a court-supervised change to district voting. And all but 1 or 2 of those have either been 5-member city council or 7-member city council. So a 2 or 3-member district, I'm not sure would make it through. I don't know what this particular lawyer and judge and such is leaning towards, but looking at the 15 years of lawsuits and such, basically all of them have either 5-member or 7-member city councils. And within that, there are 4 or 6 districts, depending on what they end up with.
So are you advocating for more than 2 or 3 because you're not sure that 2 or 3 will suffice the lawsuit? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I see it as I mean, we're going to recommend something, city council follows that recommendation, but it's not something that has gone through the courts before. So is that going to make it difficult for the city, or is the city going to be willing to face that?
Yeah, my understanding...
I know you can't answer the question, but basically I see it as a practical point rather than looking at everything. I think this is better, that's better, whatever the practical aspect of 20 years, 15 years history of what has happened with the courts and with cities changing to district-based elections.
Okay. So what I'd like to do is, go ahead, Keith, and then Teresa. I'd like to take a straw poll to see where people are at. I'd also like to share my 2 cents before we take the straw poll, some of my thoughts. So let's go to Keith, and then we'll go to Teresa, and then we'll go forward on a straw poll.
Thank you. I think to answer you, the reason the majority of cities go to single-member districts with...
Was it Rex? Rex.
With 4 members or 6 members is most cities aren't charter cities and therefore can only do what state law allows, and general law, most cities are general law cities. They can only have single-member districts, and they can only have 5 council members or 7 council members. I forget the exact, something like that. The reason most cities go to that is they have no choice whatsoever. We are not a general law city, we're a charter city. We can pick the system that we think would make things as good as we can make it for us.
Several of the cities who have gone through this have
Several of them
been
have.
charter cities.
San Francisco has gone to not a strict 4-7. They're a county, so I guess that's even weirder. I understand we're being sued by a lawyer, and I read the lawsuit, and the lawsuit has verbiage like the city shall go to districts or other mechanisms so as to comply with the CVRA. And I prefer to believe that people are acting out of the goodness of their heart to make things better, and if it's correct, and if the aim of this lawyer is to make Santa Clara a place where the vast swath of our diversity is occasionally represented on the city council, which hasn't happened for the last 40 years, then the people that have studied voting for a long time have said that multi-member districts with proportional systems tend to lead to better and broader representation at the dais level of things. And I'm hopeful that if we suggest to the city council 2 districts or 3 districts with proportional vote, with single transferable vote or some other system, that the city would recommend it, that the people would vote for it, and that 15 years from now, we'd have a city council that was in fact more representative.
Thank you. Teresa?
And I'd like to just go back to your point. I think that what you're saying is absolutely true about the 2 districts, but with the 3 districts, it really does give more candidates an opportunity to have a fighting chance and to be motivated to get involved in local politics, because it's going to be affordable and manageable, and they are going to be able to connect with their communities, and that just naturally leads to a more vibrant election system, and then out of that vibrancy, you're going to see all kinds of candidates coming forward that really will have an opportunity, and it will change the face of the dais. And over time, yeah.
And then Saskia, and then...
So just really briefly to respond to that, you know, what happens is when you, which is kind of what we have right now with the seat system, where you only get one winner every time, right? You only get one winner every time. So let's say somebody says, oh, wow, I only need to campaign to 40,000 people, right? Instead of 120,000 people if we go to 3 districts. You may get a huge influx of people who are interested, which I love it. It's great that people want to be involved in the process. That's great. But at the end of the day, the majority person is still going to win. And all of those other people that were so passionate about being involved in the political process are not going to get that majority voice. And so even if they're running, the measure of success is not how many people who are minority opinions run, it's how many of them win. You see what I'm saying? And so like, even if you get like 12 people in a single district that are so passionate about running, that person who's at the top, who is maybe a repeat candidate, or you know, is somebody that is not representative of minorities or minority opinion, will still win. And so we still wouldn't have had a representative council. So it's not about how many people you can get to run, it's about how many of the minority candidates you can get to win.
Did you want to respond, Teresa? Okay, Saskia?
Assistant. That's okay. I think, I get that, but I also, I think Hossam has brought some really interesting thoughts to the process, and what I'm seeing is that under maybe 2 systems, and I'm not saying I'm in favour of it, but I can see that it would allow for actually more people to run and not just one winner, correct? Because it'd have to be a couple of people. Yes, and I think that's a huge. I do have an issue with that. There may be a lot of people that would have too much money and would just win on how much campaign information they send out, no matter how big the district is. I think we've seen a lot of that of late, and I think we'll continue to see that if we're not careful. And so I do see a lot of benefit to what Hossam is suggesting. At first I was thinking, 3 sounds really great, but I see something else. I see another picture here, and I'm trying to grasp that at the moment.
Thank you. So I had a couple thoughts that I wanted to share. The first one is I don't like this June vote. I think that's when most stuff is just not a lot of people vote, not a lot of people pay attention. You don't get the real true representation. I mean, even in a gubernatorial, we know that it's far less than a presidential, and then you take a June vote in a gubernatorial, and I think it's going to go under the radar, and I think people aren't going to be as engaged as they would be if they were, on the regular 4-year cycle. So I don't necessarily think we should put it on the June. I think we should put it on the November 2018, because then the majority of the city will see it. There's this rush. We have to get it done. We have to get it done. We have to get it done. And I would caution that no, you don't. This is for the next 50 years or 100 years. This isn't to solve a problem like we have to cure this horrible disease. We have to cure it now. Okay, this is a marathon. It's not a sprint. So if you really want, in my humble opinion, if you really want people to weigh in, don't put it on a June election. I just don't think you're going to get the representation, and I don't think you're going to get the debate, and I don't think you're going to get as many people involved. As far as money and candidacies, there's really 2 ways to look at this, and Marcus, you're more than welcome to correct me if I'm wrong. The individual raises money, and they spend that money, okay? Some have a means to raise a lot of money. Some have a means not to raise a lot of money. But in our elections in Santa Clara, there is a lot of dark money. And there's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes that the majority of the literature that went out against me was paid for by a group in Long Beach. A lot of the stuff that came out was also paid for by the POA in favor of me. So the fact that I raised $25,000 or $30,000 or $40,000, that really in Santa Clara is kind of a misnomer, because there's so much stuff that goes on behind the scenes in PACs. So much goes on with the Democratic clubs and, you know, the chamber PACs and all this other stuff. And so just on the surface, we think that, well, if we raise $20,000, we're only going to spend $20,000. I can tell you that's not true. I can tell you that I fundamentally believe this next election in 2018 is going to become the pinnacle of dark money. I think it's going to get infinitely worse before it gets better. As far as districting, I know the majority want 3. I agree with Hossam. I think it should be 2. And the reason I think it should be 2 is because if you live in a certain district and there's 2 or 3 people that are very well known and popular, that is going to have the minority say, there's no way I'm going to win this. Because and let me just throw out names. I've elected Jody, and Jody's very popular in her district, and Keith is also very popular, been doing a lot of stuff in the community, have earned their place at the table. And then Hazel, okay, is also very strong, very well known. So if I'm looking at this, I say to myself, well, nobody really knows me, because everybody knows Jody and everybody knows Keith. So when you only have 2 representatives from, if we go to 3 districts, I can assure you that for the next decade or 2, the popular candidate is going to win. It's not going to be the minority candidate. In fact, I would argue that somebody who, let's take Marcus, for example. Marcus didn't do a lot in public service because he's 21? 23. You look 21. Okay, so Marcus wants, yeah. We better check that filing, right, Rod? Thanks. But my point is that for somebody, you know, I took my hat off to Marcus. I thought Marcus actually ran a good campaign and made a lot of sense. I probably congratulated him more than I congratulated myself. But if Marcus was a 23-year-old who works for the city of Sunnyvale and hasn't had a chance yet to become a part of a commission or a charter review or whatever the case is, and Marcus looks across the table, Marcus says, there's no way in God's earth that I'm going to win. Now, Marcus might still say, I want to understand the democratic process, I want to represent the millennials, or I want to represent whatever I want to represent. I'm still going to go for it, and I applaud that. But the truth of the matter is, I think if you go to 3 districts and 2 representatives, that it does become the mini-mayor, it does become a popularity contest. And I think at the end of the day, you are not going to have the minority candidates run. Because if you look at the way Santa Clara is broken up, and that's why I asked that the demographics be sent out, there is no clear delineation. In fact, the recommendation came back that it's almost impossible to break us up into districts. Even if you use the 2 different methods that were accepted by the courts, it doesn't work in Santa Clara, because you can't draw up districts based on certain representation of at least ethnicity. So I like 2 districts. Now, from a candidate speaking, I do like 2 districts, but not at large, because it does give me it's not a money issue, but it's more of an issue of getting out and walking. When you have to walk the entire city, it's daunting. I mean, you'll spend 3 or 4 or 5 hours walking, and you realize that you've just basically knocked a speck of sand off the table. I mean, that's what it feels like. You feel like you're walking forever, and you don't get it. It's like, so cutting it in half does help a lot. But I do think, to what Hossam said, is that every council member up there, in my opinion, and this is the way I see it, needs to do what is best for Santa Clara. And yes, if something is good for my district, but it's going to hurt the rest of the city, as a council member, I don't just represent my district. I represent the entire city. And so I think we need to be careful when we break up too much. The other thing is simplicity. I think the citizens, if we want to put something up there that the council is going to agree to and that the citizens are going to vote on, we are a very traditional city. We are very set in our ways. And I think if you deviate too much, if you want to make change and you push too hard, too fast, I don't believe you're going to get the change you want. If you look at the incumbents, if you look at just who gets elected, name recognition in this city goes a long way. So change in and of itself is good, but if you give people too much change and too radical change and too confusing a change, and what the hell are they getting at? What does it mean? People are just going to turn away and say, I don't want it. I don't want what I have to really spend a whole lot of time thinking about. And so simple, to me, is better, and that's kind of leading into the next discussion. But I'd like to hear from Steve, and then I'd like to take a straw poll, and this is not an actual vote. This is just a straw poll. I can feel the heat behind me. Like the hair on the back of my neck is standing up, and I'm thinking, okay, well, I guess, you know, that's part of being a therapist. You have to anticipate where they're going before they go there. So, yes, I know. I got it. So I'd like to hear from Steve.
2 questions for the city attorney. What is the upside or downside to putting it on a November election versus the June? Second question is, what is the impact on the lawsuit, whether we go 2-district or 3-district?
First question is, I think if we were to not put it on the June ballot, I think we would ensure that the lawsuit would move forward. I just assume that the plaintiff would just continue the lawsuit, and we'd have to continue to defend the lawsuit. And we wouldn't be able to prove the results of our wisdom until 2020. So I'd assume that what you might end up doing by waiting till 2018 is have the lawsuit continue, get a judgment before 2020, and then order us to go to districts even before 2020. So, it doesn't make much sense to me to wait to November 2018. I don't know why we would do that.
Well, actually, let him.
Yeah, I'm just answering the question, okay? Do you want me to answer your second question first or answer his question? And your second question was, well, going to 2 districts is I can't really tell you in terms of the lawsuit. I mean, it is districts, but it's like 2 cities half our size with at-large voting too. So I don't know. I don't know how a court would react to it. And then some of it. Well, there is one thing I would like to correct, and that is repeatedly the statement has been made: the majority wins. In Santa Clara, it's not the majority that wins. What wins is the plurality. So if you want the majority to win, you could choose instant runoff voting in a district that didn't have some other type, and then you'd have a true majority vote. And in fact, several of our council members have been elected with less than 40% of the vote. Where if you looked at it the other way around, where if the other 2 people one person had dropped out and it had been against a second vote getter, maybe the people who voted for the bottom 2 vote getters would not have voted for the person who got the most votes. So I don't think you can really necessarily say that we definitely don't have a system that the majority wins. We don't have a majority requirement right now. So there are other ways of dealing with the issue of concerns around who gets elected and how they get elected. And I don't think you can necessarily assume that there isn't really no majority ethnicity in Santa Clara anymore. It's all a bunch of pluralities. So you can't assume that any one of those pluralities would necessarily constitute a majority. This is all just very theoretical. I mean, there's a lot of possibility for minority candidates now to get elected in the next election, even if we did nothing. But we're looking at districting just because we have this lawsuit, and we're seeing, what if we go to districting, would it be a way of avoiding further legal fees in the lawsuit? And I think it would be. So to answer your question on the districts, 3 is probably better than 2 in terms of avoiding the lawsuit, but I can't necessarily say that a court would say that there's something wrong with 2 districts. If we went to 2 districts and we still ended up with no minorities on the council, I think we'd be in trouble.
Okay. We'll go to Hassam and then Saskia.
So when you said that in the scenario, let's say in Tino's question where it goes on November, not on June, and then the electorate votes in favor of districting, and then the court orders us to go to districting, but we already went to districting because it was approved. Can you explain that?
I think if we didn't put it on in June for the next ballot, I think the court would probably get to order us to do that anyway.
But when? Between June and November?
I don't know. I mean, I can't really tell. I mean, most of the... I'm sorry, I can't talk. Most of the cases have been brought against general law cities, and the courts can order, and they can, by ordinance, go to districts. With a charter city, it's a lot harder to tell what a court would do.
Exactly. So but my question...
But if you did not go to districts, can I finish?
Yes.
If you did not go to districts and you had an election in 2018, and the only 2 council members that won were white, and the mayor was white, then the court might not certify that election. That was the threat the last election.
Got it.
Saskia?
I mean, I get where you're going, but let's think about this. What if there's 6 people that run and they're all white and there's no other so-called colour? I mean, that's a ridiculous thought, in my opinion. I mean, I'm just saying it could happen.
That's not historically what's happened. And, well, then I think, I don't know. I mean, I'm not trying to advocate for this lawsuit. I think this lawsuit really doesn't have much merit. I think there's a lot of other reasons why the people who won. And I don't think it had much to do with race. But unfortunately, that's what the California law says, and we're being put in this situation. And I think we've heard a lot of good discussion here about the merits of going to districts. We're simply, all we're talking about now is what kind of districts to have, timing, things like that. And, so I think that all of these things are possibilities that will help avoid the lawsuit and actually bring us to a place where we think we might have a better electoral system in Santa Clara. I mean, we are the only city, us and Sunnyvale are the only 2 cities that currently do it the way we do it now. In California.
The reason Sunnyvale's not in this situation is because they have an Asian council member, from what I can tell.
Yeah.
So...
But, let's be truthful here. That seems to be the only reason.
I think I would disagree with you a little bit. I think you are advocating for districts because of the lawsuit. I just want to be perfectly clear.
I'll readily admit that.
Yes. So when you say that, I'm not advocating the lawsuit, whatever the case is, I think from day one you've pushed districts. So I just want to be clear on that. That's not right or wrong, but I think that's an opinion from the attorney, because your job is to fight litigation. Your job is to make litigation go away. Your job is to save city money. But you are an advocate of districts. I want to be clear on that. Second, I don't necessarily agree that if you put, you said, why would we put it in June? I'll go back to my point. Because the stadium was put on in June, wasn't it put on the Measure J, right? So I'm looking for the majority of citizens to weigh in. You're looking for the lawsuit to go away as soon as it can. If we go in 2018 and we say, and let's say the city says no, okay, then the judge can say, no, you're going to do it. Well, when do we have to do it? By 2020. If you put it on the 2018 ballot, and let's say it wins, when are you going to do it? 2020. So I don't think the court is going to say, oh, you didn't put it on June, so we're going to weigh in now, and by the time we get to November, between June and November, the court's going to weigh in and say, now you have the district. and you have to do it before the November election, I just don't see that being a practical resolution. Again, I don't think the resolution is to do it, ASAP. It's got to be done by 2018 or else. I just don't think that the majority of people are going to weigh in a June, if you put it on the June measure. I think it should go where the majority of folks are going to vote. That's just my 2 cents. If you really want to get the city's participation, if you really want citywide participation. So, Mary, Jody, and Keith.
So I certainly want more people to weigh in, and I think that would be really great. But I think Brian raises a really important point, which is that if the court makes a decision before we as a city vote on it, they could fail to certify election results that happen in the meantime. And then we have to pay for another election or something else. Like that's not a great thing for the city.
So what if it doesn't pass?
Well, same then. So that's actually very similar, right?
Well, so it's 6 one, half a dozen the other. If it doesn't pass, then we're screwed. If it doesn't pass in time, we're screwed.
And do we have to have 2/3?
And is it it's just majority, I think. But so if it doesn't pass,
we have a risk that way,
then the
yes.
court could come in and say, oh no, you have to do it now.
I'm just not sure why you think that it's less likely to pass in June. I understand why you think it's not.
Because if you look at the number of people that vote in June and you look at the people that vote in a November election, I would argue that it's infinitely more people vote in a November election than in a June election.
But why does that make it less likely to win? It makes it easier to get ballot measures passed.
No, I'm just saying.
Oh, I see. Okay.
I'm just saying that the number of people that are involved, the number of people that are paying attention to issues, more people tend to pay attention to issues when it's either a gubernatorial or a presidential election. When you put, most cities or whatever put stuff in the June election to get it under the radar. And we've seen it time and time again. I don't want this to go under the radar. That's just my 2 cents.
That's just a different point than it might fail in June, which is what I thought you were making.
No. I'm not saying it'll fail or pass in June. I don't know if it'll fail or pass. But I'm saying that if you want more people involved and you want people to have their say, more people are going to vote in November than they're going to vote in June. That's the only point I'm trying to make. I'll get to you, Teresa. Let's go to Jody and then Keith.
Okay, so a couple things. One is if the city wants it to pass, they should put it in May or June, not November, because you get more people who are paying attention and less people who are random. And so you'll get people paying attention and know what the issue is. And so if the city wants to pass it, they should put it on in June. Now, I think you could put it on in June, and I'm thinking about minimizing the confusion for the voters, because if you put it on in June and say it's going to change in November of 18, and then the election at the register of voters, they can do more things, and so we say, okay, now we want to change how we're going to vote because maybe we want to vote ranked choice. And then in 2022, we're going to change it again because of the census is going to change our districts. It gets really complicated for the voters to keep track of what's what. So I am wondering is if we pass it, or put it up in June of 18 and say, should we make this change, it'll take effect November of 20. And then if it passes in June of 18, according to the lawsuit, we're saying we're making the change. And it's going to take time for the census and the registrar to catch up to us. And so we have the change take effect in 2020, yeah, and then it'll be a minor change again in 2022 because of the census. I also want to put in side note that when I started my election in 14, I started almost a whole year ahead, and that spring I filed my paperwork to start raising money. There was no way I could have run as a non-incumbent against an incumbent and started in July or August, not really knowing who I was going to run against, not really being able to talk to people because you're not really sure. It means that the incumbent's going to win, basically, if there's that much confusion over it, because people don't know if they can run, where they can run, who they're running against. You're really doing a disservice, and you're going to end up with a council that's very similar to what we have already. It's not really going to help anything if we move forward in 18. So I guess my proposal would be have the charter change in June of 18 and not have it take effect until November of 20.
Thank you. The only thing that I would mention is that the assumption that if you have fewer people voting in June, it will pass. I don't think we can make that assumption because we don't know. I mean, people may be adamant against it because they don't want change.
Yeah, but I think if you look at the types of people that vote in those off elections, I think it would prove your point. I don't have any data in front of me. That's just experience.
Okay. Keith, and then Teresa. And then after Teresa, we're going to take a straw poll. One way or another, we're going to take a straw poll. And there will be no abstentions in the straw poll. Just kidding.
You can't make people not abstain. This isn't what I was going to say, to your point and your point, I guess. I mean, in practice, I think you are more likely to put something that passes in a June primary if it's popular, and if there isn't significant, you can have small but significant opposition that can torpedo something in June, because turnout is quite a bit lower than in November. So also you put things on June if you know there's a small cohort that will come out and vote it down versus letting it go to November. That's above my pay grade. I don't know. There's too much calculus involved for that. I mean, I guess I started it. I like 2 districts for simplicity and the other reasons I list. There are, to me, additionally 2 very practical reasons to go 2 districts versus 3 districts. In 2018, there are really 2 seats that are open. One council member is termed out and can't run again, and one.
No, he can't.
Everyone can run again.
Well, the city's website does not say that. The city's website says one council member is termed out.
I don't think that's a problem. But it specifically said you can't term somebody out prematurely by doing this. I remember. That we couldn't, that we said when to.
Okay, and I concur with all of that, but the council member I was speaking of has also said he intended to live with the 2-year term limit when it passed. So that's Pat Kolstad. I don't know what it is, but I mean, I am firmly believing that Pat Kolstad does not intend to run for a 3rd term for city council. So that seat is open. We have a 2nd seat where the current council member, Dominic Concerta, is running for county supervisor. And that means he would be on the ballot for county supervisor, and I don't believe he can run for county supervisor. And he does, but I think, I'm not making predictions, but it's my belief that that 2nd seat is largely also probably open. If there are 2 open seats, let's not go there. Well,
but there's 2 seats.
There are 2 seats. With 2 districts, you put 1 seat in each district. And no one on the council is tempted to vote against it or to tweak it or to mess around with where the district lines are, because no one on the council up there is going to be affected by adopting that. And then go forward 2 more years. Again, are 2 more seats that are open. And if you go with 3 districts, 4 years from now, I think you would have trouble drawing district lines that allowed everyone that was currently on the council to run for their current seats. So they are going to look at gerrymandering and either have to cleverly draw some lines so that 4 of them can remain or have the opportunity to run to remain on council. If you go with 2 districts, for the next 6 years, everyone has the opportunity to run for a seat, and 8 years out from now, everyone is term limited, so all those seats are going to turn over again. So it's more likely that more people have opportunities to run and to vote in favor of this if you have 2 districts versus 3 districts. Purely practical, I mean, very pragmatic, but.
Thank you. Teresa?
So I'm going to go back to advocating for putting it on ballot earlier rather than later, because that's why we're here. That's what the council has asked us to do. And I think it would be really irresponsible to the residents of the city not to be able to present something that they can vote on and maybe have it court mandated. I think even if we were to do a straw poll throughout the city, the residents would prefer to have something on the ballot that they can vote on rather than letting us slide. And I think we'd be letting down the council who've asked us to do this. So that's how I feel about that. I feel that would be irresponsible. I think we should come up with a recommendation to go on the ballot in June, because that's what we've been asked to do. And I think it's the responsible thing to do. I think that's what the city would expect. And I think it's what the residents of Santa Clara would expect. And then to Keith's point, going back to what you had said, we're not making a decision that's, you know, only for this moment in time. We have to look ahead. So there may be complications in putting in a new system. You deal with the complications, but you look at the big picture. You're not doing something for 5, 10 years. You're doing something that affects the city for a really long time. And if you have to put in little provisos to accommodate, you do that. But you look at the big picture and you do what's right for the foreseeable future. That's how I would feel about that. And I would think that the City Council would really want a recommendation that they can move forward with, because that's what they're elected to do, is to respond to the needs of the city. So that's how I feel about that.
Just a clarification, was it in our charter, or not our charter, was it in our scope of charter change that we do something for June? Did they ask for something to be put on the ballot in June? Because if they did, then it kind of doesn't really matter. If that's what they've requested us to do, then we really don't have to talk anymore about when it goes on there.
I think the council was always assuming they would make the decision about what ballot it would go on. I don't think they were looking to you to make a recommendation about the timing.
Okay, thank you.
And at the time we discussed it at council, it was clear that we were going to put it on in the June ballot.
Okay. But again, that would be for the council, so even if we made a recommendation, it still really doesn't matter, because they have to choose where they want to put it on there.
But I'm assuming that they're anticipating a recommendation that they can be proactive and making the decisions for our city. I mean, if I was in the council, that's what I would be doing.
I mean, they have 6 months at least before they have to decide that, but you're right, it's
I mean, that's just,
yeah. So before we do a straw vote, in the sake of transparency and taking the opinions in others, it's not legality, it's a straw. It's not illegal. I'm going to go ahead and take public presentation, because I'd like them to be able to present to us before we take our straw poll. I think that would be the right thing to do. Before we have public presentation, Rod.
Yeah, I wanted to clarify what I understand the charter provision and the change was in the last election cycle with regards to term limits and the lifetime term limits for council members. At the time, the question was raised by the then city attorney with regards to the legality of instituting lifetime term limits on someone who was serving in office. And the question was raised whether or not the term limit provision would cause people who have served more than 2 terms who were currently sitting council members from being either removed from office because they had already served 2 terms, or ineligible to run for re-election because they had already served more than 2 terms. So it was primarily whether or not the new charter provisions would apply to the existing sitting council members. At the time the conversation was made, and it was clear in the language that, in fact, no, the sitting council members would not have the requirement that they have a lifetime term limit, that they comply with that immediately, that they would actually comply with the previous city charter elements. This previous city charter elements would still require that somebody sits out for 2 years before they are eligible to run for another set of 2 terms, at which point the lifetime term limit ban would apply. So it did not, in fact, reset the term limits, as was stated earlier. So somebody who has served for 8 years could serve for another 8 without having a break in service. But it did allow folks who had served at any time prior to 2016, when that election occurred, to seek another set of terms, so to speak. It's an important clarification. Correct. If Councilmember Kolstad were to want to run again, he could 2 years later, because he had served prior to 2016.
Okay. Thank you, Rod. Okay. Steve? Yep. Is there two Steves?
Well, you've got a Steve, you've got a councilman, you've got a commission, a committee member here.
Well, if Steve has public presentation, I guess you can go ahead and make your public presentation.
I didn't know, I thought you were recognizing him to speak before public presentation. Hi, I'm Steve Chesson from, from Californians for Electoral Reform. I had distributed to you a proposal. It's on the last page of this packet, which shows the 2 districts with 3 members being elected in each cycle. 3 in one cycle, and from one district, 3 in another cycle. But the main thing about this is the template for what a proposal needs to look like. A proposal, first of all, you have to decide what the steady state is. You know, if you're going to have 2 districts electing 3 people, if you're going to have 3 districts electing 2 people, what is your steady state? And then you have to come up with a transition method. How do you get there from here? Because you've got 2 council members up in 2018. And one thing you could do, well, like Jody said, is you could put something on the ballot in June, but it would not actually take effect until 2020. I don't know what the courts would think about that or what the plaintiff would think about that, but that is something that you could do. I did a little bit of a nose count, and my prediction is that you're going to end up deciding on the 3-by-2 method, 3 districts with 2 people, because I counted 6 people who support that. But if you do go to that method, where 3 districts and 1 member is elected each cycle, that's a single winner election, you have another decision you have to make. Is that going to be a plurality election? Is that going to be a 2-round runoff election where all 5 people who file run in June and then the top 2 people face a runoff in November if no one gets a majority in June? Or will you go to instant runoff, which the county will be able to accommodate in 2020? Thank you.
I think I gave you the wrong card. Jeremy. I don't want to mispronounce your last name, but there's only one Jeremy.
My last name is Macaluso. I'm also with CFER. There's 2 things that I want to talk about. One is about what the poll is going to be about, because I think there's really 3 issues, 2 of which I think are going to be relevant to this straw poll. The first is whether we want to move to districts that allow the entire city to vote in 2018 for just the 2018 election. The second is whether we want to move to districts that do not allow the entire city to vote for just the 2018 election. And the third is what we want to do from 2020 onwards. The second thing that I wanted to talk about was regarding the relevance of the size of the districts. Our community is the people that we interact with a lot. My community, in large part, is made up of the people that I interact with at my synagogue. My brother's community is, in large part, the people he interacts with on the soccer field. The bird's eye distance between me and the soccer field versus me and the synagogue isn't going to change which one of those I go to. And it's not going to change which one of those my brother goes to either. So my community is going to be stretched across the entire city of people who go to the synagogue. My brother's community is going to be people from across the entire city who go to the soccer field. Simply having smaller political districts isn't going to change where my community is in the city. And allowing minorities say is going to allow me to, in a proportional system, is going to allow me to try to get my message to my entire community, whereas limiting it to just a very small physical space is going to really limit the amount of my community I can talk to in an election.
Thank you. Dave?
Dave Kadlacek, also from CFER and also a Westwood Oaks resident. I wanted to address a couple of things about the 3 district proposals. The stuff about electing 1 member each election from each district has already been addressed, so I won't go into that too much except to say that even if it's a plurality election, electing 1 at a time still is a majoritarian type election method that will result in dominance by the majority, if not guaranteeing that every time that someone from the majority will win. I did want to point out, though, that there's a problem with if you don't go to the every election voting one member from every seat and elect two-member, multi-member districts, which is that 2 is an even number. And when things are divided up, sort of on a dominant issue in the city, you want to have the majority and the minority be represented, but have it. But when you have an even number, if it's at all close, you're likely to end up with one of each instead of 2 for a majority and 1 for a minority, even if it's not real close to 50-50, but it's something like 60-40. So that's another problem with going to 3-member districts, and sort of the result of all of that is that really, if you go to 3-member districts, the diversity that you're going to get will be from the district lines, not from the election methods. And as has already been pointed out, for the ethnic diversity that the Voting Rights Act suit is over, you can't really draw district lines in Santa Clara from the demographics and all that. And I guess one last additional thing is you do need to go to districts because of CVRA. Particular thing would be dependent on the current lawsuit, but any districts would give safe harbor for future lawsuits.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you for the public input. So I'd like to take a straw poll. I'm sorry. Oh, did you have a card? Oh, that's okay. Don't worry. Just come on up. No big deal.
Okay. My name is Pedro Hernandez. I'm the Deputy Director of Fair Vote California. We're an electoral reform organization advancing alternative election methods. I actually have some experience with the CVRA as well, but I wanted to point out that in a lot of cities that have CVRA lawsuits, when they have imposed single-member districts, the district that gets created for that protected class, they don't get to vote in an election every year. So they get to have to vote every 4 years. So what I had talked to Steve about as a recommendation, perhaps you could explore the possibility of having 3 single-member districts on one election cycle, and then on the different election cycle, elect 3 members at large through limited voting or ranked choice voting. That way, the Asian American community that's at about 37% population has the ability to reach a threshold to have someone elected in an at-large voting system as well. In alternative voting methods, actually, was signed in a Highland proposed order by a judge that said that the CVRA does not require district-based remedies, that in fact, other remedies can be used, and that is something I can email to the city attorney as well. But if anyone has any questions, I'm here and available. I missed the last couple of sessions because I was out of town. Sorry I got here in a rush, but I'm here and available. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else from the public? Okay. So let's take a straw poll. The question is the number of districts that you prefer. And I've heard 2, 3, and 6. So we'll start with 6. All those in favor of 6 districts?
I'm sorry, Chair, can I ask a quick question
Sure.
first? And that is, because he brought up a new point that I hadn't thought about before, and I want the city attorney to weigh in on it. What is the viability of, like, say, 3 districts for one election and then 3 at large? Does that work?
These are all things that courts have decided under vastly different demographic situations than what we have here. So I just can't give you an answer on that. One thing that I would just having heard it is it sounds real complicated to the average voter. So I just don't know if that's really the best way to go, out the box here. But I'm just being honest with you. I can't tell you. There's no way to predict it. I mean, if there's a possibility that we could defend this lawsuit and win, I'm not going to say that we can't, because the demographics don't really show that drawing districts would really solve the problem. But we're talking about districts. The city council wants to get your recommendation on whether to go to districts or not. What I can tell you is that the plaintiff in the lawsuit, we have a live lawsuit now, and the plaintiff has said, if you don't go to districts, I will continue the lawsuit. So the council wanted to ask, do you want to go to districts or not? You know, will you recommend going to districts or not? So I think you should really just focus on that. If you have a real problem with going to districts, then express it. If you don't, and you want to recommend districts, and you want to recommend 2, 3, or 6, then recommend that. And it's just going to be impossible for me to psych out, you know, what would happen in a lawsuit, and I really can't do it in a public forum anyway.
Thank you for letting me pose a question.
No problem.
You're going to ask for 6,
3 and 2.
3, 2, and none?
Yeah.
So you're going to include no districts at all?
If you want to leave it the way it is, then that would be at large, yeah. I'm sorry. Yes, it would be what we currently have now. By seat, yeah. It'd just be
one district.
Yes. Okay, so those in favor of 6 districts? 1, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 2. And I'm going to leave it the way it is because I don't think any of this is going to solve anything. Okay. So somebody from 3, if you want to make a motion, I would do it now so we can move on. And before we make the motion, we've already had public comment, so I'm not going to go to public comment again. I'll let you do it before we made the motion, unless you have to speak again on this. But I think we've given you the opportunity to speak.
I mean, I think if we do the motion, then we have discussion, and then maybe they want.
Yeah,
to say.
I'm just, yeah. So
Because
anyways.
we might say things they want to react to. Who knows? Probably not, because we're going to say the same things we've already said. So I'd like to make a motion that we recommend 3 districts that are 2 members, and that they are voted every other. So 1 on gubernatorial, 1 on presidential, so that people vote every time. That's not the most artfully worded motion. My apologies.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. So we'll go to discussion. Hassan?
I think you guys know where I stand on this because I mentioned it before, but we're here to solve, to address the issue of getting minority voice on council. The proposal that the motion that was made in the proposal that is on the floor right now,
Yeah, I will. Sorry.
That's okay. The motion that is on the floor right now, where you are voting for 1 person per election, and you only get to pick 1 person, it does not allow minority voices to be on council. I mean, I made the comment earlier, and I think the city attorney correctly, or he adequately corrected my comment, which was that the majority person will win. No, the plurality person will win. And so the most popular person will win the election, even if they don't get 50%. They can get 20% and still win if there are a bunch of other candidates that get 18, 17, 10, 5%. So when you're just voting for 1 person at a time, it makes it infinitely harder for a minority person, not just ethnicity, but just somebody who's not well known in the city, to get their voice out there and to have a fair shot at getting representation. And so what you're going to end up with is a council that is 6 council members, who each won with 20% or 18%, or right now we have people on there who've only won with 35 or 34%. And so you get that cohort of Santa Clara, the 35% of Santa Clara who, quite frankly, only deserve a third of the seats up there because they're a third of the city. But they get all 6 seats because every time they can mobilize to get that 36% or that 33% or that 35% and win every single time because there's only 1 seat available every single time. I really want a system where we let the second place and the third place win, because that's when you're going to get the different voices. And maybe it's possible that if you let the top 3 vote getters win, maybe the top 2 are from amongst that, the old guard, right? But you get that third person in there, and you get that new voice in there, and they may not have a majority voice up on council, but you get to hear their voice. And so I really, really, really emotional plea or to everybody to say, don't set up a system where you're only electing 1 person at a time, because it's not going to be representative of our city.
Do you strenuously? No, I'm just kidding. I'm thinking of A Few Good Men when she said, I object, and I strenuously object, and anyways. So here's how we're going to go. We're going to go to Mary, Jody, Teresa, and Steve. Oh, wait. I meant that Steve. Yeah. You're inconspicuous, Steve. Okay.
So I understand what you're saying, Hassan, but you're also assuming that the political majority in the city is equitably distributed across the geography of the city, and I think that both the demographer's report and also sort of common sense shows that that's probably not true, and that part of the theory of why Voting Rights Act and other things prefer districts is the idea that there's geographical compactness to people's political views, and I think we have good reason to think that there may be that, both in terms of like the demographic piece, but also the fact that the north side of the city and the west side of the city and the east side of the city, I think, have historically not voted all the same way. And so that you see differences amongst the precincts. And so I think it's possible, in fact, I would say it's fairly likely that if we go to 3 districts that we will get different people. In part, first of all, many of our council members, especially over the many, many years, live very similarly to one another, so they can't actually all be continually reelected if we go to geographic districts. But also I think that the political minority interests in Santa Clara may be geographically compact, and so that makes it more likely. Now, not on every issue, certainly, and I think you're right on some points. I also think that, different discussion we're going to have later on voting methods. I think that one of the things this discussion has really changed my view on is that I think that ranked choice voting makes a lot of sense for a single member district, which I didn't used to think. But that's a different piece and not part of this motion. Yes.
Thank you.
Fair enough. Good point.
I think Jody?
Yeah. Thank you. So, Hossam, I really appreciate that you're trying to get to the real spirit of what we're trying to do, and I think we're all trying to do that. However, I think part of your concern can be helped by how we're going to do the voting. So if we go to ranked choice, which I agree, I've been swayed a lot over the course of these sessions, and we have the option of going to runoffs where you need a majority, not just a plurality. So I think that there's things that we can do within the constraints of the 3 districts that would allow us to pull some of these minority candidates into a majority. I don't think, and I also think that because we have such a homogeneous city, which I always think is so awesome that we have such a homogeneous city, I don't like thinking of the negative, I like thinking of the positive of that, but that it does mean that if a minority runs within the district, that they have as good of a chance as anyone else in that district, because we're homogeneous and we're looking at each person's strengths and what they bring to the table, and it's not just about the color of their skin as to why they're, there's so much more to it than that. So I think that if we look at some of these alternative voting methods, that within these 3 districts, we can still get a minority council member.
Thank you. Teresa?
And so that's exactly what I was going to say. We can handle the other challenges by the recommendation we make for the voting methodologies. And look at our council. We have like 5 women on it. That's kind of awesome. So I think our city does tend to vote for what they think is the candidate that best represents the individuals. And I don't know that it's always going to be based on, culture or ethnicity and stuff. I think that's what we do in our city. I think you can look at the council and you can see that.
There's a motion we're talking about, but we're going to make, and I don't think this is Robert's rules, but basically we're going to invent our own right now.
Roberts lets you make a motion to extend the meeting.
There we
while
go.
the motion is on the table.
So is there a second?
So I make a motion to extend the meeting until 9:30 or until such time as we finish this item and then do items 7, 8, and 9.
Thank you. Jody, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Good. Steve?
My comment is just really kind of a clarification for the record for Hossam, because you've said tonight and other times that our goal here is to get minority people on the council. I don't think that's our goal. Yeah, I'm pretty sure you did, but.
I said we need better representation.
Okay, so maybe we agree that our goal is to get a system that allows minorities the opportunity to be on the council. Because if our goal was to get minority people on the council, we'd kind of have designated seats, right? This is the Hispanic seat, this is the Asian seat, So if I'm misquoting you, I apologize, but I just wanted to make sure that our goal here was clear.
Legally, no. Marcus, and then I'll go to you, Keith.
I don't think any of us here can really say what's going to happen or what the outcome of whatever system we say. We won't know until we find her, but, we're Santa Clara. This is, the center of possibilities. The center of what's possible, sorry. So I think that we do got to keep that in our mind that this is going to be new to us. We don't know what to expect. Yeah, we can think of the worst, we can think of the best, but in the end, hopefully the change is good and what we pick is good. And if not, let's get around this table again and figure it out again. It may, not be time consuming and stuff, but this is a city and the city is going to be here for a while. We just grow older and then our kids, some may be sitting at this table doing the same thing that we are. And so I think just trying something new is scary, but I think we should do it.
Thank you. Hazel?
You
can go.
Oh, I just had, I guess,
Sorry,
more
Keith.
of a question. So I was just wondering if we can see, aside from if we want to go district from district, but if we're looking at the 3 districts, now we're talking about whether we go with, electing these districts within 2 years or 4 years. Can we take a straw man poll so that everyone gets a vote to see if they'd rather do it 2 years or 4 years? Because I think there's some validity in what Hossam was saying about, having continuity in 2 people getting voted in and having a voice on council.
But the motion was.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so the current motion is that we just go to 3.
3, but then
3 and alternated voting.
2 years.
And they alternate every 2 years.
Okay, versus every 4 years.
Right, their terms would be 4 years. but
Because
they'd be
for me,
voting on-
my opinion was that I do like the 3 district, but may like it better if we go every 4 years. So I was just trying to see, where we could actually get that in there.
Okay, thank you. Keith?
Thank you. That was actually the first thing I was going to say, which is I mean, I kind of understood the straw poll to be 2 districts versus 3 districts, and the motion is 2 districts electing 1 person every 2 years. 3 districts are electing 1 person every 2 years. I would prefer to that 3 districts electing 2 people every 4 years. As a comment, there are a couple problems with 3 districts. One problem is in 2018, in a third of the city, no one gets to vote. Because we only have 2 open seats. So
Everybody gets to vote on mayor still. The mayor's up.
in
But yes.
2018, 2/3 of the city gets to elect someone to the city council, and the last third of the city does not get to elect anyone to the city council.
Maybe.
What?
It depends on how the lines are drawn.
Well, there are only 2 seats that will be
Only
up
2
in
seats.
2018.
But it doesn't matter by seat, it's where they draw those lines. Those 2 seats might actually be in 1 district. So.
No, they can't be in one.
No, but what I'm saying is if there's 2 openings, and if those 2, if they draw it in a certain way.
It doesn't matter what they do.
If there are 3 districts,
They just,
and there's only 2 openings, one district doesn't get to
One district doesn't get to vote.
That's what he's saying.
No. I mean,
That's a different issue.
they have to live in the district, but a third of the city in 2018
Would not
will
have
not
to
be
vote.
voting for anyone for
unless we
city
don't do
council.
this until 2020.
Right.
Unless we don't do this until 2020. The second point is with single-member districts, I strongly prefer something like instant runoff voting. It's not ranked choice because it's a single district. It's instant runoff voting where, you eliminate candidates until someone achieves a majority. But the registrar of voters can't do instant runoff in 2018. So we, for 2018, are really stuck with either a plurality election or, well, we can't do a primary because the primary would had to have been in June, and we don't pass it until June. Or, to me, crazy cumulative with multiple names. So in 2018, we are likely going to have a plurality election.
If you want to have a majority election in 2018, you could have the option of having, if no one wins a majority in November, you could have, you could actually have a special election for a runoff between the top 2 candidates.
Okay. So there is an option. I mean, that would cost more money.
It would cost more money, but if that was a value, then you could do it.
Well, no, could happen in both districts. In fact, it's more like, I mean, it's as likely to happen in 2 districts as 1 district. The third option is something I've heard from people, which is if we're 3 districts, that campaigns would get cheaper. But if it's 1 seat every 2 years, to me, campaigns actually get more expensive because currently it's you think it's every 4 years for each seat. And it's still every 4 years for each seat, but since there are 2 people in the district that can run, right? If you don't win this time, you're tempted to run 2 years from now. And if you don't win, you're tempted to run 2 years after that. Currently,
Isn't that already true now? Because there are council seats up every 2 years. You could always run every 2 years. There are probably people in this room that may do that. That's true now. So I think it'd be potentially cheaper than now because the geographical area of the campaign would be smaller.
okay, yeah, so that's not much different, actually. Back to my first point, I would be more supportive of 3 members elected 2 at a time. I understand the desire to vote for someone every 2 years, but it's also exhausting to vote for someone every 2 years. I mean, we currently...
So as the drafter of this motion, it would seem like maybe it would be prudent to separate those 2 issues, as Hazel suggested. And so I would like to amend my motion to just be about 3 districts. And we can put the sub-issue to the next motion. 3 districts, 2 members each.
Yep, that makes
And we'll
sense.
figure out the timing in the next motion.
Is there a second?
But I think Steve has to decide whether or not
Steve has to, yeah.
he accepts the amendment.
Okay. Okay. So from my perspective, I probably look at this a little bit differently than other folks. Number one, I don't think drawing districts is going to solve the real issue in Santa Clara. I read the demographic report, the demographer's report from 2010. I read it 5 times. And they concluded the same thing. There is no way you can draw districts in Santa Clara that is going to represent certain ethnicities to give minorities a greater chance of getting on council. So I think we're afraid of a lawsuit. I think the plaintiff has the burden of holding up the demographics and saying Santa Clara needs to draw districts because of the lack of representation for certain ethnicities. And I think if you take our current demographics, I don't think you're going to be able to make that case, number one. Number two, I don't think we're going to get more minority individuals on council because of districts. I think we're going to get more minority folks on council because of the way we elect people. So we can sit here and draw all these districts and we can say, oh, we checked the box and we're going to do something before the court makes us, or he might sue us again, or whatever the case is. But as Marcus said, you know, just because there's a lawsuit doesn't mean you bend over backwards. It doesn't mean that you have to go, oh my God, we don't want to get sued again, so let's change something that perhaps isn't broke. What's broke, perhaps, is the way we elect people, not the fact that we have districts, okay? And arguably, in our race, you or Raj, well, probably Raj, because he was just the way it went, very well could have won if we would have had a different way of electing people. Okay, so this districting thing for me is not going to solve anything. In fact, I would argue that if you go to 3 districts and 2 candidates, it's going to become a popularity contest in that district. And what people are going to say is, who are the 2 front runners and do I have a chance against them? When you have 6 seats, you could have 4 seats, and then you could weigh and say, okay, who's in each of these seats? Well, gee, there's, say, 1 white candidate, and there's 2 non-white candidates. Well, guess what? I might join that race because I might have a better chance. We might have a better chance of getting a minority elected. So this whole notion of if you have 2 people running every other year, you're going to have it is not going to result in what we think it's going to result in. And based on what I've heard from the city attorney, the plaintiff will keep suing because the outcome of the election is not going to take care of the real core problem. So we could still, based on what I've heard, we could still be sued subsequently if it's still an all-white council. So it doesn't go away.
Except districts are in a safe harbor for the California Voting Rights Act. So certain provisions of the act don't apply to cities that elect their council members
But he could
districts.
But he could still go back. Based on what I've heard, he could go back and say, the way you're going about things still is not right, because there's still not minority representation. As Saskia said, in Sunnyvale, there's 1 person that is a minority, and perhaps that's how they're skirting this. So if you have a 2018, 2020 election, and it's still all white, then the plaintiff could come back and say that your voting method, or whatever the case is not working. And so I'm going to continue to sue you until something does work. Did I understand that right?
I'm not aware of any city that's gone to districts that's been sued under the Voting Rights Act.
Okay, so the other piece was campaigns will get cheaper. Campaigns are going to get as expensive as the money you raise. Okay, so we make this notion if I only have to campaign to this section, it's only 40,000 people. The truth of the matter is you are going to, if you can raise enough money to do 3 mailers or 4 mailers, or maybe a phone, whatever, a phone, robocall. So I'm not advocating it. For the record, I want to make sure that everybody understands I'm not advocating it. But at the end of the day, you're going to spend what you raise, right? And if I can raise another 5,000 and send out another mailer, and I think that's going to give me an advantage, then perhaps I'll do it, or my opponent will do it. So this, well, PACs will do it. So I don't think campaigns are going to get cheaper. I don't think we're resolving the real issue here. I think the real issue is how we elect people. And if you look at the demographics, there's no way you can draw lines. And yes, the lawsuit goes away, but perhaps I would argue that if a judge had to look at Santa Clara and say, well, how is districts going to resolve this? I think the burden of proof is on the plaintiff. I mean, we're automatically thinking we're going to lose. And you know what? Maybe we don't lose. Maybe the judge says, you know what? This works in San Francisco because here's their demographics. But in Santa Clara, I can't find or delineate any one part of town that would even address the issue of minorities not being represented on council. So people may write and they may find a way to spin this as I'm saying that I want the same old because of the color of my skin. I will go and say that's absolutely false, that this does not take care of the issue. Districting is not going to take care of this issue. And I would almost assure you, if you have two people in one district, it's going to become a popularity contest. And that's what's going to happen. And if you think that minority folks are intimidated now and think they can't win, I guarantee you that will be tenfold if they have to run against two people. Or arguably, well, every 2 years. So it's only one person. So I just want to be very clear and on the record that the reason I'm saying leave the seats is because I don't think that we could draw districts that would resolve the issue. I don't think that if you look at the recommendation from the demographer from 2010, both ways of doing it, which were accepted, point blank said there's no way we can do it in Santa Clara. And we are unique. We are different in our demographics. And if they were different, I would be the first one to say, let's draw them that way. But they're not. Hossam.
The point that I want to make, I actually do echo or believe in a lot of what Tino is saying. The reason in the straw poll, I voted for the two districts is because we get safe harbor if we draw district lines. Even if it's one line, we get safe harbor, and that prevents the city from multi-million-dollar lawsuits in the future. I fundamentally believe that the city is not divided, or it is geographically dispersed with regards to ethnicity. And yes, the burden of proof lies on the plaintiff, not on the defendant, the city in this case. But from a safe harbor perspective, that's why I preferred the two districts over the no districts. But the points that Tino made I actually agree with the spirit of it, because at the end of the day, even if you're running for a race in 3 districts, right, and you're in 1 district out of 3, you're gonna. If you look at once you've drawn district lines, the only benefit that I'm hearing of increasing the number of districts, even six districts, right, which surprisingly nobody voted for, is, one person, sorry, Rex voted for 6 districts, is that it makes it easier for a candidate to canvass and campaign. That it makes it easier for a candidate because the number of people that they have to go and speak to, the number of doors that they have to go and knock on is less. The candidates will raise the same amount of money. If you can raise 20 grand, you will raise 20 grand whether you are running at large or whether you are running for a seat in a 6-member district. You will raise the 20 grand because you don't want to leave a penny on the table and risk not winning because you didn't raise that extra dollar. So if you can raise 20 grand, you will raise 20 grand if you are running for a seat for a 6-member or a 6-district city or an at-large city. You will raise the same amount of money. So it doesn't make raising money any less. It just makes it, how many more mailers can you send out? Can I go and knock on as many doors? Even if you have 6 districts, you will go and spend every weekend or every evening knocking on doors, even if you're going to knock on the same door twice. So once you go districts, it makes it less representative for the city the more you increase the number of districts. It makes it less representative because you are now making it a popularity contest amongst, within that district. And the highest vote getter will win that popularity crown. And it's just, I only believe in going to 2 districts to put the city in a safe harbor from lawsuits. But fundamentally, I think this city is unique in that we don't have, ethnic pockets. And so I think if we address the problem, which according to the CVRA allows us to do that, by district or other, method. It says it very explicitly, by district or other method. And I think any other proportional systems will be that solution. But for the sake of safe harbor and to prevent the city from being sued again, that's why I prefer the 2 districts. But once you've decided to go districts, increasing the number of districts only makes it more difficult to get minority voices or minority ethnicities or whatever you want to call it, but as long as they're a minority. And so that's why if you're going to go to districts, just keep it as few as possible. And if you're going to go 3, why not go 6? You'll knock on, you can knock on more doors. You're still going to raise the same number of money, the same amount of money.
Okay, Rod, and then Keith.
Just a reminder as context with regards to the conversation about the amount of money that's raised, the City of Santa Clara's Political Campaign Finance Reform Act has a voluntary campaign expenditure limit, which has been, for the most part, universally accepted. I believe one candidate who has run since it's been used in, I want to say it was 2000 was the first year, has not accepted it. That person actually filed a 470 form and didn't raise anything. That's actually just didn't like it. So right now it's $40,000. The last election cycle was a little over $40,000. It would be anticipated that that voluntary campaign expenditure limit would have to be adjusted were you to go to a smaller district so that it wouldn't stay at the $40,000 level. It would be some different method for determining what that voluntary campaign expenditure limit were for the district races. And may end up that for the mayoral race, chief of police, and city clerk's race, that it would still be a citywide limit of some type.
But that doesn't change my point, which is you will raise as much money as you can raise, no matter what, as much as you can within the limit, no matter how many seats there are.
So if it's now is $40,000 and you have 3 seats, it would be, what is 13,000 something, 13,300, something around there. Sorry? So 15, and that all of a sudden is an easier chunk for somebody to achieve.
And that is also speculation whether or not that will reduce. The council would have to approve that.
We're going to go to Keith, and then we'll go to Mary.
On the money for campaigns, I would like to think campaigns would get cheaper. There are some costs that are fixed in campaigns. If you're hiring a campaign manager, you can't tell that person, well, the district is smaller, you're still going to work the same number of hours, but I'm going to pay you a third what I used to. So I believe the city, good luck, let me know if you find one. I suspect the city is not going to be able to lower the per district election number terribly much. Your website costs the same amount of money, whether your district is 15,000 people or 150,000 people. I'm going to echo what Hussam said, right? I suggested 2 districts, largely for the safe harbor provision. But to me, the fewest number of districts you have means you have more chance of getting good candidates that can all run at the same time. And the example I get is if you divide your tabletop into 6 things, and then you take a handful of M&Ms and you spread them across the table, well, if you divide your table in half, the odds in M&M that you want to eat falling in one half of the table are pretty good. And if you divide your table into 30 pieces and you spread your M&Ms across, odds are the M&Ms you like aren't going to be in the one little square you're allowed to pick an M&M up from. So making the boxes smaller doesn't make your choice better. It makes your choice worse. It makes it less likely you will be happy with the choices you're able to make. Practically, 2 districts electing 3 people at the same time using single transferable vote means that the support a particular candidate has to get is 30-something odd %. And in Santa Clara, Asians, and in particular Asian Indians, are soon going to hit about 30% representation, probably in the north half of the city, and they are more likely to elect a candidate of their choosing. And that is the real remedy long-term to avoiding CVRA lawsuits. It's having a city council that periodically represents the actual diversity you have in your city. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
The interesting thing, though, that I will bring up just in what I read in the last demographer's report was that even though you have a population that's 33%, the number of people that can vote is significantly less. And so again, I really want to go back to the point of we make the assumption that if you're Hispanic, you'll vote for Hispanic. If you're white, you vote white. And I vehemently disagree with that, because I think people in this valley are the most intelligent people in the world. And I think that they have a mind. And I think we shortchange their intelligence when we think that we make the assumptions that if you have 33%, you finally have the threshold, you can finally have a candidate. I just disagree with that. I think people are, those that are interested in politics and looking at it for the most part, are going to see who best represents their needs individually. So I just caution that making the assumption of just because you have a certain percentage of folks that are, and the other interesting thing is that there's a lot of H-1Bs because we're very high tech. There's also well, a number of other folks that are here that aren't eligible to vote, and so let's not just make the assumption.
To answer that, I agree with you. There are the current population in Rivermark is divided between immigrants and non-immigrants, and all of their children are citizens. And 20 years from now, they are still going to live there, and they are going to be eligible to vote.
That's if their parents will them their house and they don't move out to live somewhere that's cheaper. So again, we do these assumptions in what millennials want, and everybody says millennials don't want a backyard until you have a kid, and then you want a backyard.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, forget it. Anyways, I'm sorry, we're digressing.
And the other minor point I'd make is, communities are more than just ethnicities. I think, right, it was mentioned sports teams are communities. The church or synagogue or mosque you go to is your community. And many of those groups are approaching or well exceed 30% of the population. And they themselves could get together and elect a candidate to represent their views.
Thank you. Mary.
So I have 2 points. One is that I think that I don't disagree with a lot of the points being made about the fact that our districts aren't necessarily going to increase the chances of particular ethnicities because of the dispersion of our population. I think actually the reason I would support 3 districts, it has much more to do with the fact that I think that there is a fairly identifiable chunk of the city north of Bayshore that has a very different relationship to development and to some of the key issues in our city, and that if we do 2 districts, their voices will be diluted too much, and we won't get to hear as much of that point of view, and so that's the reason there. On the point of the cost of campaigns, you're right. People will raise as much money as they're allowed to raise and as much money as they can. The question is more, can somebody who is not the highest spender in the election, who doesn't raise as much money, still be viable? There's plenty of times in elections where the person who wins did not spend the most, and I think it becomes more likely in a smaller district that it's possible for the person to win who did not spend the most.
And I would say in the last election, Kathy Watanabe took no more than $100, and she won. So again, I don't think it's this perception that if you raise more, you have a better chance because you can do more informing, the city who you are. But yes, I think in a couple of these, the top money, and I'd have to check with Rod, but the person who spent the most didn't win. I'm not sure exactly. I know Kathy was one, but anyways, we can talk about that after. I saw a hand go up, Hassam and Jody. Okay. Oh, sorry, Jody. Go ahead.
Just since a couple people spoke who didn't like the motion, I just wanted to put it out there that I still do like the motion. I still think that smaller areas make sense. I think having 2 council members per area makes a lot of sense because it makes it kind of straightforward that each time, every 2, well, my idea, like Mary's, was every 2 years. We can, that's for the next motion, but that it can be very simple how your representatives are elected and when. So I still do like that idea.
Thank you. Hassam?
I wanted to address something that, which I think is maybe at the root of Mary's recommendation, and correct me if I'm wrong, but just from what you just said the last and the second time you mentioned it, which was that you really are advocating for Northside to be its district, to get its 2 seats on the table.
To a large extent, yes.
To a large extent. Splitting the city in half. If you think about, if you look at the city from just a geographical, not population standpoint, and in my picture I happened to draw the line, again, it was arbitrary, but I happened to draw the dotted line horizontally. So splitting the city maybe around Central Expressway. Again, it's arbitrary, okay? North Side would mathematically be 2/3 of that half. They would be 2/3 of that half. And so even if you split the city in half...
But to Tino's point, many of them are...
No, I know, but we're not here to dissect who is eligible to vote and who's not. That's not our purview, and that's not our charter to do that. Even when the districts are drawn, they're drawn based on population, not based on eligibility of voters. So we have no say in that at all, and we can't do that because we don't know who's eligible and who's not eligible to vote, right? You'd have to create a registry to do that, which we're not going to do. So, I mean, even when you do, if one of your objectives is to ensure that the North Side gets a good seat at the table, a representative seat at the table, splitting the city in half gives them actually a better shot at it. Why? Because now they can fight for 3 seats, not just 2. And because they are 2/3 of that half, they have a really good shot at winning all 3 of those seats. But at least they're guaranteed 2 from a mathematical standpoint. So you are actually empowering the North Side by giving them a shot at half of the seats rather than just 1/3 of the seats. Because if you just box them in, just like I think Keith's example of splitting the table and tossing the M&Ms, you've now boxed them in and said, you get only 2 seats at the table. When you split the city in half, you say, you get an opportunity at 3 seats at the table, and you have 2/3 of the votership of that half of the city. So not only you almost guaranteed 2 seats, you also have that chance for the 3rd. When you do 3 districts, you max guarantee them 2 seats at the table. Okay, thank you.
I wouldn't say that my
Go ahead,
point
Mary.
is, I don't think my point is that only the North Side has a geographical interest that might differ from other parts of the city. I think that there's other communities of interest that when you draw districts, you consider population and natural barriers and neighborhoods, and I think there's a good chance that a west side of the city district would have a different political interest around development than the east side as well.
Yeah, sure. I was just addressing your north side comment. I mean, you have west side where you have Central Park and all the development that's happening there.
We have kind of,
then you have the east, which is the old quad. So yes, you're right. I mean, if you look at the 3 zones in the city where you have stuff around City Place and the stadium. You have stuff around this, the central, library, Central Park and library, and you have the stuff around the old quad. It naturally lends itself to 3 districts. I get it, but you are still boxing, and so now because I live in the old quad, I can't have a say on the council member who lives in the north side. I don't agree to that.
Just for the sake of time, Mary, I want to give you a chance to.
I wanted to call the question.
Yes, but Saskia had her hand up, and so I want to make sure that I get to her, and then yes, I do want to call the question.
Two things. One is that Mr. Chesson said at the very first meeting we had that districting does not necessarily solve the problem, and I would agree with that. I would agree voting solves the problem. It has for many, many years in many, many different countries. And the way the system is done in this city, first time I came here and I heard how they voted, I was shocked that a country that talks about freedom has a voting system like this. That's all I have to say on that one. It is a very poor voting system. That's my first thing. The other thing is, I really am concerned that we start to box it down. Like Keith is saying, we have little areas, and I said it last week or the week before, the time before last, was that who can tell me that the north side doesn't affect me? It affects me every day of my work. Every day I go out and I have to meet a client and it's over on the north side, there are certain days I have to check the calendar. Just because I live on this side, it doesn't mean that that side doesn't affect me. We are all affected by how our city has been divided and through some of the decisions that this council or that council before that made. And we cannot deny that. And I think there is an element of truth to the fact that we should all have a say in who represents us. Do we have representation? Who cares at this moment in time? Right now, our vote is not the way it should be. And that's the bottom line. I don't care if it's districts, really, at this moment in time. I want to have a vote that counts. And it's not just a first-past-the-post sort of system, which is what you have right now. Because it's not a fair system. You might think it is, but in the rest of the world, it's not.
Thank you. So before we call the question, we have public presentation. Pedro? Yeah.
Motion to extend the meeting for an additional 15 minutes.
Well, the original motion was as long as it takes to get through this.
9:30 or is what I said.
So we're going to get to 9:30 and we're not there, so we're going to keep going.
Okay. Sorry.
Pedro?
All right, here we go. It sounds like there's conversation about two-member districts. And there's conversation about alternative voting methods. I will say that there's a way to have both. I would say that you could explore the possibility of having 3 single-member districts and having 3 at-large seats available in staggered elections. That way, I see that the Asian citizen voting age population is at 31%. If you give them an opportunity to have a candidate elected by district, they may be able to do that. They also are big enough, and probably big enough now since the ACS survey that I took this number from. That's the American Census Service. That citywide, they would be able to meet a threshold of 25.01 under ranked choice voting to also have an additional seat elected at large. That means 2 seats out of 6 seats. And that would be something close to proportional that accomplishes both the safe harbor and an at-large representation system. There's conversation about whether or not you need to have district-based elections in every election. That's not the case for CVR cases that have minority-majority districts drawn. They don't get to vote every election cycle. If they do, they might be able to do so for mayor on the other staggered, but point being is that you're creating a district to provide for opportunity, and you're also modifying your election system to give those voters a meaningful opportunity to elect a candidate of choice by lowering the threshold to win. But I just want to caution and also encourage you to explore that option. And I'm around if anyone has questions.
Thank you. Jeremy?
I just want to address the fact that this current amendment would leave 1/3 of the city not voting in 2018. And I don't think that that's going to do anything to help your court case. Or this current motion is going to leave 1/3 of the city unable to vote. So I would like to recommend that you amend the motion to have 2 districts in 2018 and then have a single 2-year member elected between 2020 and 2022 elected by the entire city, which would go away before allowing what you're proposing. Or if the proposal to have the elections at the same time happens, to have the elections in 2018 only last 2 years.
Thank you. Steve?
First, can you restate the motion so I know exactly what I'm speaking to? 3 districts, 2 people, and each
When
elected?
we are tabling when they would be elected to at the next question.
Oh, okay, great, thank you. I'm reminded, this has been a great discussion you've had. I've been reminded of 2 quotes. The first one is that everything that is going to be said has been said, just not everyone has had a chance to say it yet. And then the other one, which I think is from Winston Churchill, you can trust the Americans to always do the right thing after they've tried everything else. So you're going to make a decision as to 3 districts, 2 members each. You then, of course, have to decide, are you going to elect 2 people at the same time using a semi-proportional or proportional system, or are you going to elect 1 person every 2 years? I gather you've separated the question that way. And then you have to decide, well, what's the steady state in that? Because if it's 2 people at once, that means in some cycles, 2 districts are electing, so 4 council members are going to get elected. And then in the other cycle, the other district is going to elect their 2 people plus the mayor. If you're doing 1 person each time, then of course you know the steady state is easy. It's each district elects 1 person every 2 years. And after you decide the steady state, you then have to decide the transition. For in that latter thing where you're electing 1 person every 2 years, you only have 2 seats up in 2018, which means maybe districts A and B each get to elect 1 of their people. And then in 2020, A and B elect their 2nd person, and District C elects 2 people, but 1 for a 4-year term and 1 for a 2-year term. So you've got those transition questions. And then you have the voting method decision if you don't go to whichever way you go. If it's 1 person, like I said before, plurality, instant runoff, or a 2-round runoff. And if it's 2 people at the same time, well, are you going to do plurality, or are you going to do proportional or semi-proportional? So you've got a lot of decisions to make. I don't know if you want to make them all tonight. You just want to do the district one tonight and then make the rest at the next meeting. And I'll see you again at the next meeting.
Thank you. Okay, is there any other comments from the public? Thank you. Okay, so, yes.
To the attorney. So if we are saying, we're voting on this 3 districts, 2 members each, it's a whole separate question as to the transition to get to that, right? So we're not making any decision on this motion as to how we're getting to that. We're just saying we're going to get to that.
That's what I understand. And you have to remember, these are all just recommendations.
Absolutely.
So,
but I do think we want to be as clear, since we've talked about this for a while, and I imagine council members are listening, that we want to be as clear as possible as to what we recommend. So if we recommend 3 districts and 2 members, and we recommend how we want to alternate or however we want to do that, and we recommend an election method, we might also want to talk about if we can come up with a transition method. Because that could, I think the more that our proposal gives to them, the better informed they are, and they have something to hang on. Otherwise, they're going to have to come up with that, and it's something that we might want to look at first, just to give them an idea of as many details as we can.
I think the way you're going about it is really the best way of doing it. To have separate recommendations successively, council can pick and choose among those recommendations. You're giving them your best recommendations, which is exactly what they asked you to do.
We're getting more and more specific, I think, with each one, which I think is good.
Thank you.
I'd like to call the question.
Okay. So all those in favor of the current motion to have 3 districts with 2 members in each district? All those in favor? Is that a yes? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Opposed? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Well, the motion. Wait a minute.
I counted 6.
No.
You can't be, because Chris Horton isn't here.
Yeah.
Chris isn't here.
So it was 6 and 6.
7 and 5.
No, there was, did you vote or did you abstain? Oh, you voted.
It was 5 to 7 against.
I'd like to make a motion.
Okay.
I'd like to make a motion to go to 2 3-member districts.
Okay.
And that would put us in a safe harbor, and it would allow for multi-member districts with an effective way of getting better representation for minority voices and ethnicities. Anybody would like to second that?
Okay.
2 3-member districts. 2 districts with 3 members each.
Is there any
Call the
discussion?
question.
Okay. Well,
We got to get out of here, people.
no, you know what? We're not going to do that. We're not going to just go because we have to get out of here. So I don't mean to be rude or push back, but even if we're
withdraw that.
joking, I don't want to go, yeah, let's get out of here. It's not going to happen.
That is not my intention.
good.
I think I've said everything I could say, and I suspect many of us have said everything we can say.
Is there anyone who,
That,
I'm sorry.
I mean,
go ahead.
I would be happy to hear from anyone that believes there's something wrong with 2 districts, that 2 districts has some flaw that 3 districts is particular about fixing.
Sure.
Okay. So I guess the concern I have about 3 members in a district is it's an uneven number. And so we haven't talked about, I mean, the next question is, well, then how do they get voted in? But I'm trying to just try and wrap my head around how that might look. So can you, well, because you have 3. So do they all get elected every 4 years? Do you do 2 1 year and 1 the 2 years later?
But that's not the part of the motion, because to
I
be
know,
fair
but
to the
in-
but to be fair to the previous motion, you guys made a motion about 3 districts without any. We pulled the second half of the motion, which was how we elect them.
I know.
So my
But I could imagine it in my head,
Sen-
but I can't imagine this.
But there are so many. I mean, there are multiple ways, but that's not part of this motion, right? But if we can talk about this motion, and if it passes, then we can debate how. If you want to do, 2 and 1, or all 3 at the same time, or however we do it. But that's not part of the spirit of this motion.
Yeah, and I guess to me, I'm an engineer, I think kind of logically and even and all those things, that 3 is just not an even number to me. So that's why I had a hard time with having 3 members per district, is because I can't find a way that I like when you have 3 members per district. I can't figure out a way to vote for those 3 members in a way that makes sense to me.
Can I
so that's
offer
why
an-
I can't see going forward with it.
If you don't mind me to offer an idea, but again, we're not discussing this as part of this motion, which is
Make
you
it-
vote for 1.
make it
real
quick.
Yes, you vote for 1 on gubernatorial, and you vote for 2 on presidential, and it's ranked choice voting either way. And you still get to vote and participate in every election cycle. But you get to vote for 1 in 2018, and you get to, which would work in our scenario, you get to vote for 1 in 2018, and you get to vote for 2 in 2020, and then in 2022 you get to vote for 1, and in 2024 you get to vote for 2, and it's ranked choice voting either way. So that's a scenario. It doesn't have to be even.
And I appreciate what Jody's saying. Jody is logically figuring out why, even though it goes into a subsequent conversation, it's her logic as to why 2 doesn't necessarily work for her. I'm sorry, 3 doesn't work for her. Yes, Teresa.
So I would like to go back to, I think it works better as our city evolves, changes, and grows, that we have 3 districts. I think that allows people to have better local representation. I would also think that if we went to 2 districts, we could have polarization. The city between the needs of the north side and this side. I think we've already started to see that, and I think that could become more entrenched and make it harder to get things done. I think 3 is a better balance. It's a better way of having representation balanced of the needs of all the members of the city. So in addition to the other reasons why I was supporting 3 districts, I would be concerned about polarization.
Thank you. Although I fundamentally still don't believe districting is going to solve the problem, I realize that if I go with what I want, which is to leave it the way it is, because I think it's voting, not districts, that is going to really be the true solution. If I vote no, then we're at 6-6. And so of the two districts for me is closer to what I think is what we really need. And I'm really concerned about the 3 districts and 2 people, because I really, really believe, especially in this city, that the incumbent, if that incumbent is running and that's who you have to go against in a very, I mean, you are going to lose a tremendous number of people because they're going to say, I can't beat the incumbent. And you're going to narrow that pool of people that even think about running. And so I fundamentally believe that 2 is better than 3, because I do think when you have 3, and if we choose to elect in a different way, I think you're truly going to be able to get that representation that you're looking for. And so I agree with Hussam's 2, although I still would prefer to leave it the way it is.
And I'd prefer to leave it at large, but again, just from the perspective of safe harbor, I know that takes care of that. I mean, it's just, it's.
Is there any other comments? The public does have a right. Oh, sorry, Marcus, go ahead.
Yeah, so after hearing your statement a little earlier, I did change my mind from having a 3-district 2-member system to keeping it at large the way we have it and just changing the way we vote. I mean, I think, honestly, that's what would be best. Forgetting about the district, like you said, it just doesn't make sense in Santa Clara. And you know, safe harbor, okay, but we're Santa Clara. I mean, I say bring it. No, true.
If I'm thinking, here we go, ding, ding, ding. So Beverly and then Keith.
Well, that's one of the reasons I'm going for the 2-district, because I fundamentally believe that this isn't going to solve the problem either. However, I think that if you go the 2 districts, it'll help with the fighting of this lawsuit that has a huge cost to the city, which hurts actually the people in the city, because that cost has to be borne by the city as we fight that litigation, right? And so then there's who knows what could happen as a result of that and how much money it would cost. So that's why I'm sticking with how I feel about this.
Thank you. Hazel and then Keith.
The only reason I'm concerned about the 2-district is that it all depends on where the lines are drawn, right? I think right now, we have the majority, again, in the South Side. So if it's by population, right, there could be a chunk, or there could be a sub-segment of the city that will come up into the North Side as well, right? And let's just say a couple of the 95050 Old Quad residents come to the same district as I live in, and I'm going up against Hussam or Pat.
No problem. No problem.
No, seriously.
In fact, you have my endorsement already.
Patty Mahan, right? Raj Shahal. I think he lives there, right? Tino. Raj is not North Side. Right? I would lose, right? No, I mean, I could lose, right? No. There's 3 seats, but then just depending where the lines are drawn, right? There could be some. No, there could be, let's just say, again, I don't know, Benton or Homestead, all the way up north to Cali de Primavera, which is the north side.
I mean, I don't know how correct.
Oh, yeah, well, yeah, that's my main concern. And the other reason why, again, when I shared my opinion is that the 3 districts, I think there's unique issues to each area when you look at it, right? And we have to have everyone on this council represent us. And I think for us as Santa Clara, that's the best way to get this. And when we're voting on projects, not the 2 district members will be voting, it's the entire council that will be voting. So it's a more well-informed decision for the council to have the 3 districts so that they can channel in what everyone else in that particular district is saying to make a more well-informed decision again. That's the way I looked at it. And then lastly, the safe harbor, right? It puts us in safe harbor.
I will say informationally in 2010, in addition to demographics, I mean, we looked at if we drew districts, where would they be? And it wasn't in the demographic report because the demographers didn't do that part. I believe we had some report on it, but it might have only been oral. My recollection is if you divided the city horizontally, it was somewhere north of El Camino, but not much north of El Camino. And if you divide it horizontally, or if you had it vertically, it's almost San Tomas, and then extend that up, and it bends one way or another north of there, just because Rivermark is not centered.
But again, we're not going to draw.
That's not us.
Yeah, let's not focus on where they may draw the lines because I mean they could make a peace symbol and divide the north side in half, and then you'd have 2 big chunks and a chunk on the bottom. I mean, we just don't know. But to your point, you're 100% right. I mean, I know there's going to be talk of the curfew. There's talk of there's stuff in the neighborhood after events. There people leave their. I mean, there's stuff that's unique to the north side that somebody on the south side doesn't have to deal with every day. So I think your point's well taken. But I would also say that there are people on the south side, when we think of some of the stuff that you're going through on the north side, that we don't like one bit. So I think the city is still, even though it's growing, it's still small in that, like Saskia said, I mean, I'm talking to some folks in the north side now because there's some issues that I want to get involved in because I think it's the right thing for the entire city. So I hope that whatever the council is, they will equally give the attention that it deserves, whether it's a north side issue or, another, south side or whatever the case is. But we'll go to Hassan, we'll go to Saskia. Were you done, Hazel? Yeah. Okay.
So Hazel, I want to address the 2 topics that you covered because I think I have an answer to each one of them, but I may be wrong. The first one was on the issues, right? Northside has issues. We know it. You see me in the council meetings fighting for a lot of those things and the shenanigans that keep happening up there. When you draw lines that mirror or mimic the issues based on geographic, because I don't live in the north side, but I still care about those issues, right? But from geographic standpoint, if you draw the lines to mimic or mirror the issues, you are only exacerbating the problem. In other words, you are compartmentalizing the north side issues only for the north side district. And you're compartmentalizing the Central Park issues with only the Central Park district. And you're compartmentalizing the Old Quad district issues with only the people who live in the Old Quad. When you draw the lines in that way, you're saying only you can vote on the representatives that will represent that issue. Ideally, in a perfect world, it's one district. We all care about the issues throughout the entire city. Again, I'm only doing this, the 2 districts, to take us into safe harbor. But when you want to, I want to be able to advocate and choose a candidate that will represent the north side. But by boxing it into the 3 districts along those issues, along the lines of the geographical issues, you are acknowledging that only the people that live there can vote on that issue. And I don't want that to happen. So it's actually an argument against going to 3 districts drawn along those lines. So you by breaking it, you force to say we all care about all the issues. Even if you do 2 districts, how you draw that one line that splits the city in 2, even if you go with the El Camino comment, right? People who live north of El Camino who don't live in the north side, ultimately are going to have to represent the north side views as well, because that's who their voters are. So they're gonna have to care. So that's the first topic. The second topic was about worrying whether or not the north side, their voice will be diluted by people who live between North between El Camino and 101, right? So if you imagine this line of El Camino, I don't know the validity of it, I'm just using it as an example. So if you imagine this line between El Camino and 101, and you're saying all the people that live in between there are going to dilute the vote of the people north of 101, right? Actually, it's the opposite, because the way the lines are drawn, it has to be done by population. So when you split the city in half, 50% of the people live on District A, and 50% of the people live in District B. If you were to talk about dividing it into thirds, 33% live in each district, right? So the difference between 50 and, I know this is getting very mathematical, but the difference between 50 and 33%, it means that 33% of the city lives in the north side. That means the difference, 17%, live between El Camino and 101. So north side has a stronger voice because they're 33%. And the other 17% are the people that live between El Camino and 101 from a population dispersal standpoint. So you still have 33% against the 17% that don't live in the north side if you're two districts. So north side can, out of 3 seats, they're guaranteed 2 seats, 33 to 17. They're guaranteed 2 seats. They actually might be able to steal that 3rd seat as well. So from the perspective of, not steal. Don't twist my words, sorry. You know what I'm trying to say. So anyways, so to your point of whether or not the north side's voice gets diluted, it's actually the opposite. It gives them a chance to be able to get more than 2 seats on council.
Thank you. Saskia.
Just thinking about the north side and what happened in the last election, I think it's really obvious that one of the reasons Kathy Watanabe won was because she campaigned on the basis she was from the north side, and we all got to vote on that. And I am sure that there were many people in other areas that voted on that premise alone, knowing that there was a need for the north side to be represented, right? There was probably a need to have some ethnicity too. And again, I go back to the voting system. I think that's where we lack, and that doesn't allow for true representation. I am of the opinion that I would rather have this. I think if I look to Hossam, and I know he's mathematically probably smarter than I am, he must have a reason for putting this forward, and for that alone, I can go behind that. It just seems in many ways fairer. I like 3. I know you might not, but I think of one of my children who was in a housing situation last year. There's always the risk of 2 against 1. I like that when it comes to elections. I think that's really great. I think we can there's going to be a split in those areas. There's going to be sometimes 2 against 1, sometimes there'll be 3 of them voting together from that area. I like that. I like to have an upset, and I think that's what we're looking for here.
Thank you. Teresa.
So, Hossam, one thing I totally disagree with was you want to go for 2 districts just for the safe harbor, but I think we need to be looking at the bigger picture and trying to come up with a recommendation that works for everyone in the city going forward for who knows how long. And I think with more districts, you have more people getting invested because it is more localized. I don't agree with your premise that eliminates people getting voted in. I think voting methodologies can take care of a lot of that. But I think if we stopped and really thought about what the needs of the actual residents of the city are, many of them would like to have a say in a smaller district where they're more invested. So I don't think just going for safe harbor, that being your primary motivation, if I'm correct, is maybe the best motivation.
Thank you. Quickly.
Okay. Yeah, so that, if we're talking just, from an ideological standpoint, I agree with Tino, I agree with Marcus. This city is too small and we are too diverse to have any districts. I really believe it, even 50 years from now. I really believe that this city is best suited as a single district, as one city. We are one city. But we're going to keep getting lawsuits left and right. And that's why I say, let's do the minimum damage by districting. I consider districting as a damage to our city, but we minimize the damage of the district to remove the damage of a lawsuit. And then within that, let's do the system, let's do a districting scheme or a districting setup that empowers as much people as we can. And that's why I go with the lowest number possible districts.
So I would disagree with you on that too, because I think the history of our particular city shows that we have legacy seats.
We have what, sorry?
We have what would be considered legacy seats, the same.
Because the seat system, it has nothing to do with us being one at large. It's because...
okay, so that's a different argument. We don't really need to go there because it's getting late. But I actually do disagree with you. I think that it would be more vibrant and diverse, empowering people in smaller districts.
Thank you. Is it something new that we haven't already discussed?
It's kind of an answer to you, and I will be quick. I mean, the notion that by drawing smaller districts, you let people be more focused on their localities is true. If there's a small district and everyone in the district wants a park, then their representative is much more likely to vote for a park than if there's a large district and a small area wants a park. But as you add districts, people in other places have their own representatives, and those representatives suddenly don't care at all about the people around you that want a park, because those people are never going to vote for anyone else. And so you're balkanizing the council. And if you look at San Jose, they have 11 city council members, and every council member vigorously fights to get stuff in exactly their council district, and they don't work terribly well at the borders between council districts. And factions develop in the council, and parts of the city get money and parts of the city don't get money.
Thank you.
So that I just want to say, but that's why I think two districts are bad, because of polarization. Then you definitely have a polarization. Three districts, there's more of a balance. That's another reason why I would think three districts would make more sense, because you don't have one vying against another. You have that balancing force.
Right. So, yes, I appreciate the comments. I appreciate the candor. I appreciate people sharing their conviction. I don't think at this point we're going to convince anybody one way or another. I think we've kind of beat a dead horse. I think everybody's had their chance to make the case, and I don't think we're going to sway anybody at this point, so I'd like to call the question. I'm sorry. Actually...
Was there a second for the motion?
Yes, I second.
Okay. According to the attorney, we don't have to have public comment, but I will have public comment for the sake of argument.
And for clarity, the motion is two districts, nothing about the voting mechanism.
Two districts, nothing about the voting method. That's okay. Let me let Rod get reset here, to be fair. Okay. Steve.
Thank you. I realize the motion does not include the voting system, but it does, and Hazel, this is to your point, address the possibility of using a proportional or semi-proportional system where the threshold of election is only 25% of the vote. So you could get elected in such a district. The other thing is the district lines. I realize because your city is kind of stretched that way, there seems to be a natural tendency to draw a horizontal line, but that's not the only way a line can get drawn. It could get drawn vertically. You could do it east-west, or you could do a donut with a hole. You could have a central region and a peripheral region. You know, I don't know if that's practical or not, but you're not going to be the ones who are drawing the lines. So I think you need to just vote, and I strongly urge you to vote yes on the two-district, three-member each proposal, because it opens a lot of possibilities to make Santa Clara even greater than it already is. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. I'm going to hear Steve tonight as I'm trying to go to sleep. Okay. Is there any more public comment? Okay, so we'll call the question. All those in favor of Hassam's vote? I'm sorry, Hassam's motion? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7? All those opposed? And that's 5. So the motion passes. Okay. So I think...
May I make a motion to continue the rest of the agenda items and adjourn?
Yes.
Can I make one request for that? I think it would be useful to talk about future agenda topics just so that we can get on the next agenda. Otherwise,
Well,
someone else has to
it's already
decide.
on there. So the one that we'll add is obviously the transition discussion. So that's a discussion we need to have, but the following discussion will be the voting methodology, and that's already on the agenda, so we don't have to do anything other than just add that one. And I'll work with Rania to get that on there.
Can I make one more suggestion, not for next meeting, but for before we wrap up, which is I think we should discuss how the mayor and city clerk and police chief are elected. Currently, they are plurality, and if we are potentially moving to some other system, I think it's worth thinking about whether we also, move to ranked choice voting or something else for mayor, police chief, city clerk, if for no other reason than that so we don't have to explain 2 different ways we elect the people in Santa Clara.
Okay. Does anybody else want to put that on the agenda for next session?
No, not for next session, for a future session.
Isn't next session?
For, no. I believe we have 2 more.
July 10th and July 24th.
Oh, wherever I put it. Yeah, July 10th and July 24th. The next meeting will be at the library, and then the following meeting will be here at Chamber. So is there a second on the motion to adjourn?
I have a clarification. For the last meeting, we actually have to change it to the library. It will be at the Redwood Meeting Room. Last meeting on July 24th. Yeah, I would.
And I would suggest that you bring back your recommendations on the district elections first and see if city council wants to give you the charge to do the other stuff. Because they haven't asked you about that, to work on that. So I would suggest that you go back, say we finished with the districts, we're doing this, do you want us to look at these other things?
Okay, so there's a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
Beverly, second. All in favor? Opposed? Thanks, everybody.
It's always lovely seeing you people. It's always lovely to see you.
Look. I just walked 2,000 steps. Wow, just by standing up.
It was mostly the bike ride over here, I think.
I'm okay with the 2 districts. I would prefer to read.
Well, I mean, if you read my thing, I am less interested in.